The path begins where the city's last tiled roof gives way to dry grass and the open sweep of the Campagna. You are walking a gravel track that runs parallel to the aqueduct, though you cannot see the arches yet. They lie ahead, hidden by the deep indigo that still holds the sky. The air is cool and motionless, carrying the faint mineral scent of damp earth left over from the night. In your left hand you carry a small clay oil lamp, its flame cupped behind a thin sheet of translucent horn, and the light makes a steady warm circle that bobs just above the ground at your side. Over your shoulder hangs a leather satchel with a wax tablet and a bronze stylus, while your right hand holds a wooden measuring rod as tall as your shoulder, its end notched and darkened by many immersions. The crunch of your sandals on the gravel is the only sound close by, a soft rhythmic grinding of small stones on stone that you have heard so often it has become a kind of quiet companion. Above you, the sky is beginning to change. The black that was there when you rose from your mat is thinning into a deep blue that holds only the brightest stars. Ahead, the horizon is a faint wash of charcoal, and as you walk you watch it shift with each step toward a color you cannot yet name. The gravel underfoot is pale, almost white in the lamp glow, and beside the path the dry grasses stand tall and stiff, their seed heads catching the light like 1,000 fine lines drawn in silver. Wild fennel grows in patches, and when you brush against a stalk it releases a faint anise smell that hangs in the still air for a moment before fading. Dew soaks the tips of your sandal straps and darkens the hem of your tunic, a coolness you feel as a slight weight. The path curves gently to the right, and now you see them, the arches of the aqueduct rising out of the darkness like a continuous dark ridge built against the paling sky. The arcade is a long line of openings, each exactly the same shape, marching across the plain, and at this distance you can make out only the silhouette. It is a shape of perfect repetition, arch after arch after arch, stretching from the hills you cannot see, all the way to the city you left behind. There is no movement on the structure, no light, no sound. It simply stands there as it has stood for more than a century, and you walk toward it. Your lamp flickers as a small breath of air moves across the field, a breath so light it barely stirs the grasses. You cup your hand around the flame without thinking, a gesture so old it lives in your fingers, and the light steadies. You can hear the aqueduct now, or you think you can, a faint, high hum that might be the wind moving through the upper galleries, or might be the water itself, a sound so constant it has become part of the silence of this place. You stop walking for a moment and simply listen. Far away, a fawn dog barks once, twice, and then falls quiet. The sound hangs in the air and dissolves, and you are left again with only the soft hiss of your lamp and the faint trickle that you now believe is real. You resume walking, your pace slow and even, the gravel sliding under each step. The arches grow taller as you approach, and the sky behind them is now a deep blue-gray, the color of a pearl held in shadow. The individual blocks of the piers become visible, dark rectangles stacked with a precision that speaks of old hands and older knowledge. The stone is a warm ochre in the lamplight, and you know that when the sun reaches it, the color will deepen to the hue of dry earth after rain. You look for cracks, for any sign of settlement, but the piers are solid, their joints tight, and you note nothing unusual. At the base of the nearest pier, you find the first maintenance staircase. It is a narrow flight of stone steps built into the thickness of the masonry, rising steeply and turning once out of sight. The entrance is a low arch, unadorned, with a single iron ring set into the wall for a rope that is no longer there. You set down your lamp on a flat stone and lift the measuring rod, running your hand along its length to ensure the wax plugs in the notches are still firm. Then you sling the satchel so it lies flat against your hip and pick up the lamp again. The staircase is dark, but you have climbed it so many times that your feet know the rhythm of the risers. You step into the archway and begin to climb. The stairs are worn in the center, each step cupped by the passage of inspectors before you, their sandals over decades leaving a shallow bowl in the soft tufa. You place your feet exactly in these depressions without thinking, and the stone is cold and faintly gritty under the leather. The walls are close, plastered with a rough lime render that catches the lamplight and throws it back in a muted, golden blur. The air inside is cooler than the open field, and it smells of damp stone and old lime, a smell that reminds you of a cellar, but cleaner, sharper. The trickle of water is louder now, a continuous breathy sound that seems to come from everywhere at once. At the top of the stairs, a narrow landing opens onto a low doorway, and you duck through into the spacus, the covered channel where the water runs. The transition is immediate. The air changes, growing moist and cool against your cheeks, and the sound of the water is no longer distant. It is right beside you, a steady, soft, sliding noise that fills the small space. The channel is just wide enough for a man to walk with his shoulders brushing the walls, and the ceiling is so low you must stoop slightly, your back curving into a gentle arch. You will hold for the rest of the inspection. The floor is invisible, but you know it is covered with a shallow flow of water, and you step down into it carefully, your sandals sinking into the cold liquid and finding the smooth plaster beneath. The water comes to just above your ankle, and it is colder than the air, colder than the stone. It swirls around your foot and then settles, flowing past with an even pressure that never changes. You lift the lamp and look at the walls, which are lined with opus signinum, a waterproof plaster of crushed terracotta and lime, polished, smooth and colored, a deep dark red. The plaster is cool and slightly damp under your fingers when you touch it, and it runs without a seam from the floor up to the curved ceiling. The surface is so smooth, it almost feels wet even where it is dry, and the light from your lamp slides across it without catching. You pause to listen. The water in the spacus does not gurgle or splash. It moves in a silent sheet, broken only by the gentle lapping against your ankles, a sound so soft it is barely more than a texture in the air. The ventilation slits are narrow openings cut into the side of the channel every 4 paces, and through them you can see the sky beginning to warm. The slits are angled so that you see only a thin vertical slice of the outside world, a line of pale blue, a single branch of a distant pine tree, the faintest blush of color that tells you the sun is about to lift over the hills. You walk forward slowly, the water pulling at your tunic with a gentle, persistent weight. The channel is straight, and the light from the slits falls on the water in a series of soft, gray rectangles that ripple only slightly where your passage disturbs the surface. Each slit illuminates a small section of the opposite wall, and you watch as the patches of light slide past you, one after the other, a slow, silent procession. Your sandals make a small sucking sound each time you lift your foot from the plaster floor, a sound that is absorbed almost instantly by the humid air. The first marker is a small bronze peg set into the wall at knee height. its surface green with age but still bright where it has been rubbed by countless fingers. You stop and hold your measuring rod vertically, lowering it until the foot rests on the channel floor. The water closes around the rod with barely a ripple, and you watch the surface climb the notches. The depth is 3 Roman palms and a finger's width, exactly as recorded on your last visit. You lift the rod and wait for the water to settle, then measure again to be sure. The result is the same. You find the wax tablet in your satchel, its surface slightly warm from your body, and with the stylus you make a small mark beside the number 3, your handwriting small and neat from long practice. Beyond the marker, the channel opens slightly into a wider section where the arches bridge a shallow dip in the land. The ventilation slits become taller here, letting in more light, and you can now see the water clearly, a smooth dark sheet that moves without haste, carrying nothing but its own weight. The surface is glassy, reflecting the ceiling in a blurred inverted world of red plaster and shadow. You see your own outline pass over it as you move, a dark shape haloed by the lamp's glow. The water does not pause for you. It flows on, day and night, a constancy that predates your own life and will continue long after. You pause at a slit and look out. The Campagna spreads below you, a vast quiet plain still half in shadow. The olive groves are rows of dark, round shapes, the vineyards a grid of wooden stakes, and the gravel path you walked is a pale thread that winds back toward the city. The city itself is a low, dark mass on the horizon, its roofs catching the first light as a scatter of gold. Smoke rises from a few chimneys, thin columns that drift and vanish. The sky is now a wash of soft blue and shell pink, and the sun is a liquid brightness just below the edge of the hills, throwing long, cool shadows from every clump of grass and every stone. You stand there for a long, slow breath, letting the calm of the view fill you. A single bird, a swallow perhaps, cuts across the arcade and is gone. You turn back to the water and continue. Your pace is unhurried, a slow, rhythmic walk that matches the flow beside you. The plaster underfoot is slightly sloped, a gentle gradient that keeps the water moving at a steady speed, and you can feel the incline in the way your ankles flex. The walls are cool under your occasional touch, and the sound of your passage is a soft, wet whisper. Every 10 paces you run your hand along the ceiling to check for seepage, but the plaster is dry and solid. The water hums a constant, low note, a sound that seems to come from inside the stone itself, a vibration you feel in your chest. After some time, the light from the slits changes from grey to warm gold, and you know the sun has risen. A beam of light strikes the water directly and scatters into 1,000 tiny moving lines on the opposite wall. The water sparkles where the light hits it, a fleeting, silent dance of brightness that follows you as you walk. You lower your lamp and blow out the flame, setting the small coil of smoke free to drift upward into the shadows. The natural light is enough now, a soft filtered glow that fills the channel with a warm, dusty radiance. You reach another marker, this one a small carved stone set into the floor at the base of the wall. It shows the symbol of the water office, a crossed tridented caduceus, worn but still legible. You kneel, the water soaking the knees of your tunic, and run your thumb over the carving. The stone is cold and smooth, the lines of the symbol deep and clean. You note its condition on your tablet, good, no spalling. The water swirls around your knees with a gentle, continuous pressure, and you feel the slight tug of the current as it passes you. For a moment you stay there, listening to the deep, resonant quiet of the aqueduct, a quiet that is not silence but the sum of many soft sounds. The water, the faint creak of stone expanding in the sun, the distant call of a bird, your own breathing, slow and steady. You stand and continue walking, the channel curving very gently to the left, a curve so subtle you do not notice it until you look back and see the long, straight section behind you has vanished. The Spacus runs now through a cut in a low hill, and the walls on either side are closer, the plaster here showing the faint marks of the trowels that smoothed it long ago. The marks form a pattern of shallow arcs, each one overlapping the next, a kind of frozen calligraphy that records a single day's work by a man whose name is long forgotten. You trace one of the arcs with your finger, following its path from the floor up to the ceiling, and you feel a quiet kinship with that long-ago hand. The light ahead brightens, and you emerge into another arcaded section, this one shorter, passing over a small stream bed that is dry now, but shows a line of darker gravel winding through the grass. The ventilation slits open onto a wider view, and you see that the sun is fully up, a white gold disk that warms the stone and draws the dew from the land. The air inside the channel warms slightly, and the scent of wet lime grows stronger, a clean mineral smell that reminds you of a well. The water beside you continues its silent, purposeful glide, and you match its pace, feeling no hurry, no need to be anywhere but here. You stop to examine a small discoloration on the plaster near the waterline, a faint rusty stain that might be iron in the aggregate, bleeding through. You scrape it gently with your thumbnail, and a tiny puff of red dust drifts into the water and vanishes. The stain is old, stable, nothing to worry about. You make a small note on your tablet anyway, a habit of thoroughness that has kept this channel running for generations. The wax is soft from the warmth of your hand, and the stylus leaves a clean, bright line. The sun continues to climb, and the light inside the channel becomes a warm golden haze. You walk on, and the arches repeat, each one a quiet frame for the landscape outside. Your thoughts begin to settle into a rhythm as steady as your steps, a quiet, calm meditation on the simple data you gather: depth, flow, integrity, sound. There is no urgency in any of this, no crisis, no hurry. The aqueduct asks only for your attention, your slow and careful attention, and you give it freely. You hear the water before you see it change, a subtle deepening of the hum that tells you a vent is blocked. You stop and look up, finding the slit that is half covered by a tangle of dried grass and a small abandoned nest. You reach up and pull the debris free, the dry stalks crackling under your fingers, and the light pours in fresh and clean. The water's note returns to its usual softness, and you drop the nest outside, watching it tumble into the air and disappear into the shadow of the arcade. Then you wipe your hands on your tunic and continue. The morning wears on, and the channel carries you deeper into the countryside. You pass small inspection doors set into the side of the Spacus, their wooden frames darkened with age, their iron hinges rusted but solid. You push one open and it swings without a sound. Beyond it is a narrow crawl space that leads to the outer wall, but you do not go in. You simply check that the door is free and that the seal around it is tight. Satisfied, you close it and walk on. At last you come to the first settling cistern of the day, a small chamber tucked between two sections of the channel. The entrance is a low arch, and you stoop to enter. the water deepening slightly as you step down into the basin. The Piscina Limaria is a calm, still pool that reflects the curved ceiling with an eerie perfection. The water here is almost motionless, the flow having spread wide and slow to a silent drift. You walk along the inspection ledge, a narrow shelf of stone just above the waterline, and look down into the clear, dark liquid. A fine layer of pale brown sediment covers the floor, soft as dust. You check the bronze grating at the outlet, running your fingers over the bars to ensure no debris has lodged there. The grating is clean, the water passing through with a quiet, smooth flow. You kneel and touch the surface of the pool, and the water is colder than in the channel, still and deep and utterly calm. You remain there for a moment, letting the quiet fill you, before rising and returning to the Spacus. The channel continues its long, straight path, and you follow it as the sun now begins its slow climb toward noon. The light is brighter, the shadows shorter, and the warmth of the stone begins to seep into the air. You adjust the strap of your satchel and walk on, your mind quiet, your notes full of small, precise observations. The water flows beside you, constant and silent, and the day stretches ahead in a calm, unbroken rhythm of arches, light, and the gentle sound of your footsteps in the shallow stream. The arcade carries you onward through the morning, each arch a quiet frame for the pale waking fields, and after a time you come to a place where the Specus dips slightly, and a narrow inspection door set into the left wall stands ajar. The door is made of dark ancient oak, bound with iron straps that have gone a deep brown, and its hinges are silent when you push it open fully. Beyond it lies a small stone platform open to the sky, a kind of service balcony that projects from the side of the aqueduct, and you step out onto it, blinking in the sudden flood of warm sunlight. The air outside is fresher and drier than the cool, humid breath of the channel, and you stand for a moment, breathing it in, letting the sun fall on your shoulders and the damp hem of your tunic. Below, the Campagna rolls away in a patchwork of silver-green olive leaves and pale stubble, and the long shadow of the arcade stretches westward like a dark comb. You check the outer masonry here, running your palm over the brick facing and finding it sound, the mortar tight and unfretted by the weather. Then you close the door again, but instead of returning through it, you descend a short exterior stairway set into the pier that leads down to the ground, because you want to inspect a stretch of the channel from below before climbing back up at the next maintenance staircase. The gravel crunches under your sandals as you walk along the base of the arches, your lamp now extinguished and swinging lightly in your hand, the measuring rod balanced on your shoulder, and the sound of the water high above is a soft, breathy murmur, constant and soothing. The next staircase is built into the flank of a taller pier, its entrance an unadorned arch of roughly dressed stone, and you pause before it to look up at the row of ventilation slits that line the Spacus. They are dark, narrow mouths in the pale plaster, and from one comes the faint, high note of a draught. You step into the archway and immediately the air cools, the sun falling away behind you, as though a curtain has been drawn. The stairs are before you, steep and turning once to the left before straightening into the dark upper reaches. These are the steps you know well, the stone worn into a gentle hollowed cup in the center of each tread by the passage of inspectors over many decades. A long, slow erosion that has softened the edges and given the surface a patina as smooth as old soap. You place your left hand flat against the side wall, feeling the cool, slightly gritty lime plaster under your palm, and begin to climb. The rise is steady and unvarying, each step lifting you a Roman foot closer to the water, and you settle into a slow, deliberate rhythm. The measuring rod held lightly in your right hand, while the lamp swings on its leather strap with a tiny, rhythmic creak. The walls are close enough that your shoulders nearly brush them, and the plaster here is painted with a dark wash that absorbs what little light seeps down from above, leaving you in a soft grey dusk. You do not need to see the steps. Your feet know the depth and breadth of each one, the slight polished hollow that guides your soul to the center, the gentle inward slope of the worn stone that feels almost like a hand cupping your heel. You climb, and the sound of the water changes as you rise, its low, formless murmur gathering shape until it becomes a distinct, liquid voice, a continuous, sliding whisper that fills the stairwell and seems to come from all directions at once. The air thickens with moisture, and the dry, dusty scent of old stone is slowly replaced by the clean, cold smell of wet lime and the faint, metallic tang of mineral-rich water. After 20 steps, the staircase makes a quarter turn to the left, and a small slit window opens in the outer wall, letting in a blade of bright morning light that cuts the darkness and falls across the steps ahead. You pause for a breath and look through the slit, seeing a narrow band of the countryside, a distant clump of cypress trees standing like dark flames, a square of vineyard, the glint of a small stream. The world outside is waking, but you are enclosed in the quiet body of the aqueduct, and the only thing that matters is the climb. You shift the measuring rod to your other hand and continue upward, the light from the slit fading behind you, and now the sound of the water is very close, a rushing, glassy purr that you can feel as a vibration in the stone under your palm. The steps here are shallower, worn even more deeply, and the plaster on the walls gives way to exposed stone, blocks of tufa laid in regular courses, their faces cool and faintly damp. You touch one, and your fingertip comes away with a trace of moisture, like the sweat on a cold jar. At the top of the stairs, a narrow landing levels out, and before you is the arched doorway that leads into the spacus. The doorway is low, its lintel a single rough-hewn block of stone that forces you to bend forward, and from the opening spills a diffuse pale light and the full soft chorus of the flowing water. You duck your head and step through, and once again you are inside the water channel, the transition immediate and complete. The air rips around you, cool and heavy with moisture, and the sound of the current is no longer a distant whisper, but a steady, close, enveloping hush, like breath. The channel here is just as you remember from the earlier stretch, narrow enough that your elbows can touch both walls if you extend them. The ceiling curved and low, forcing you into a gentle stoop that has become second nature. The floor is hidden beneath the flowing sheet of water, and you step down into it carefully, your sandal breaking the surface with a soft, wet sound and finding the smooth, unyielding plaster below. The coldness of the water takes you by surprise, as it always does. A sharp, clean cold that rises from your ankles to your calves and makes the small bones in your feet ache for a moment, before settling into a steady, numbing coolness. The water is clearer here than it was further downstream, a pale, translucent green-brown that carries no sediment, and it flows past your ankles with an even, silent pressure, as though it is politely moving around you. You stand still for a moment, letting the current press against your shins, feeling the slight tugging force of the entire volume of the aqueduct leaning gently against your legs. The surface of the water, where it is not disturbed by your presence, is a sheet of moving glass, smooth except for the faint, hair-thin lines that mark the boundaries of invisible currents. The lamplight, still lit though you will soon extinguish it, casts a warm golden circle on the surface, and within that circle the water shows a deep amber depth, like ancient honey. You lift your lamp and look at the walls. The opus signinum plaster that lines the spacus is a dark, rich red-brown, the color of dried terracotta, and its surface is polished to a high, slick gloss that gleams in the lamplight. The plaster was applied long ago by men who laid it on in thin, careful coats, and the trowel marks are still visible as faint, parallel arcs that sweep across the lower portion of the wall and then fade into a flawless smoothness near the ceiling. The plaster is cool and slightly damp to the touch, and when you press your palm against it, the coldness seems to reach through your hand and into the bones of your wrist. A fine, almost invisible webbing of hairline cracks runs across the surface in places, but these are old, stable, filled with the natural lime that leaches from the plaster over time, and they do not weep. Water. You trace one with your fingertip, feeling its slight, rough edge, and you make a small note on your wax tablet. Stable micro cracks, sector 23. The ventilation slits are regular openings cut into the right-hand wall, spaced exactly 4 paces apart, and each one admits a column of daylight that angles down into the water and paints a bright rectangular patch on the opposite wall. The light is warm and golden now, the sun having climbed fully above the hills, and it carries in it tiny, floating motes of dust that drift and swirl in slow, silent spirals. You watch one mote as it travels the length of a light beam, a fleck of pale stone or dried pollen that catches the sun and glows for a second before vanishing into the shadow. The patches of light move slowly across the wall as you walk, each one a brief window onto the outside world, and through one you can see the top branches of a pine tree, its needles dark and still against the bright sky. You take a few steps forward, and the water swirls around your calves with a soft, liquid rustle. The plaster floor is as smooth as the walls, but it has a subtle, gritty texture that keeps your footing sure, a faint roughness that you feel through the leather of your sandals. The ceiling is low enough that you must keep your head bent slightly forward, and you have learned to walk with a relaxed, curved spine, your shoulders relaxed, your eyes always moving from water to wall to ceiling and back again. The smell of the spacus is a blend of wet lime, ancient stone, and the faint, fresh, mineral scent of the water itself, a smell that reminds you of a deep, shaded spring, of the cool hollows where water rises from the earth. There is no decay in this smell, no mustiness, only the clean breath of stone that has been wet for 100 years and has never grown tired. Now that you are fully inside and your eyes have adjusted, you decide to extinguish the lamp. You lift the small clay vessel, cup your palm over the top, and blow gently through the side opening, and the flame gutters, flattens, and goes out with a thin, curling trail of smoke that smells of burnt olive oil and hot wick. The smoke drifts upward and disappears into the shadows of the curved ceiling. Without the lamp, the channel is not dark. The sunlight from the ventilation slits is enough to fill the space with a soft, grey-gold illumination, a twilight that is constant and calm. The water, released from the warm circle of lamplight, takes on a deeper, cooler hue, a dark, clear green like old bottle glass, and the reflections of the slits shimmer on its surface in long, wavering lines. You walk slowly, your pace a calm, measured tread, and you listen. The sound of the water is a complex, layered thing, a low, continuous rush that seems to come from everywhere at once, overlaid with the delicate, lapping whisper where the current meets your ankles, and very faintly a higher, musical note where the water passes over a slightly raised joint in the plaster floor ahead. You kneel to locate that joint, feeling along the floor with your hand while the water pushes against your wrist. The joint is a subtle raised seam where two sections of plaster were applied on different days, and the water makes a tiny singing sound as it flows over the edge. You rub the seam with your thumb, and the plaster is sound, with no crumbling or separation. You rise and continue, the small sound fading behind you. The channel runs straight here, and the row of slits becomes a kind of quiet, luminous procession, each one marking 4 paces of your journey. You let your mind follow the rhythm of the slits and the water, and you find that your thoughts slow and spread until they are as calm and transparent as the water itself. You are aware of the cool air on your face, the gentle resistance of the current, the soft, constant pressure of the plaster walls at your sides, and the small, precise tasks of inspection that lie before you. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Ahead, a small patch of greenish light appears on the water, a reflection of something outside, and when you reach the next slit, you see that a moss has grown on the outer lip of the opening, a soft, bright cushion of emerald that feeds on the constant moisture and the morning sun. You reach up and touch it. It is cool and velvety, dense with tiny leaves that hold beads of water. The moss is harmless, even beautiful, and you leave it there, a small living thing clinging to the edge of the ancient stone. You pass a bronze inspection marker set into the wall at waist height, its surface mottled with a green patina, but still shining softly where countless hands have rubbed it. You run your finger over it and feel the slight, raised edges of the numerals that indicate the distance from the source. The number is 42, meaning you are 42,000 Roman feet from the springs that feed this aqueduct, a distance that represents a long, slow fall across the countryside, a fall so gentle that the water seems to glide rather than rush. You imagine those distant springs, the cool, clear basin among the limestone hills where the water wells up out of the dark earth, and you feel a quiet, wordless gratitude for the engineers who charted this path and the laborers who carried the stones. You walk on, and the water never changes its pace or its voice. It is a constant companion, a steady, flowing presence that asks nothing and offers everything. The morning light continues to shift, the beams from the slits angling lower, their color deepening from gold to a soft pale yellow, and the shadows on the opposite wall grow slightly longer. The air warms by a degree, and the smell of wet lime strengthens slightly, a clean, astringent scent that clears your head. Your tunic is soaked from the knees down and clings to your legs, but the coolness of the water keeps you comfortable, and the weight of the wet cloth is a familiar, grounding sensation. After a long, straight section, the channel begins a very gentle curve to the right, and the slits are spaced slightly farther apart, a variation you notice because the intervals of shadow between the light patches grow longer. You make a note of this on your tablet. Curve at sector 25, slits at 6 space intervals. The ceiling here is slightly higher, and you are able to straighten your back for a few blessed moments, rolling your shoulders and feeling the vertebrae click softly. Then the ceiling lowers again, and you resume your gentle stoop, your body remembering the shape it must hold. You come to a place where a small, slow seepage has darkened the plaster in a vertical stripe, the water staining the surface a deeper, almost black red. You run your hand over the stain and feel no active moisture, only a cool, smooth patch that is slightly colder than the surrounding plaster. The seepage is old, sealed by the natural lime that is leached from the plaster and recrystallized, a self-healing property that you have seen many times. You note the location and the condition on your tablet, adding a small sketch of the stain's shape, which resembles a thin, inverted tree. The sound of the water deepens slightly as you enter a section where the channel floor is a fraction steeper and the current picks up a little speed, pressing more firmly against your calves. You adjust your pace to match it, walking a little slower so that you can still feel the subtle textures of the floor beneath your feet. The water here has a livelier sparkle, the light from the slits breaking into tiny dancing points of brilliance that scatter across the surface. You watch them for a while, the endless silent firework, and then you move on. The channel begins to straighten again, and ahead you see a patch of brighter light that indicates a larger opening, perhaps another inspection platform or a junction chamber. You walk toward it, the light growing, the sound of the water softening as the gradient lessens. When you reach it, you find a small arched alcove set into the wall, a resting niche with a stone bench just above the waterline. The bench is worn smooth, and you realize that many inspectors before you have sat here, letting the water flow past their tired feet. You climb onto the bench and sit for a moment, your wet sandals dripping, the water swirling quietly below. Through the larger opening, you can see a broad view of the countryside, now fully illuminated by the morning sun, and you allow yourself a long, slow breath. The world is quiet and orderly, and the aqueduct stretches away to the east and the west in a long, unbroken line of arches, a patient, enduring work that holds the day in its stone arms. You rest your measuring rod across your knees, pull out your tablet, and begin to add a few more lines of notes, your handwriting small and calm, while the water murmurs its endless, soothing story at your feet. The channel stretches before you in a long, gentle corridor of soft shadow and moving light, and as you walk deeper into the morning, the work of measurement begins to settle around you like a familiar, quiet ritual. The measuring rod is in your right hand, its smooth, oiled wood warm where your palm grips it, and every few steps the lower end brushes the surface of the water and leaves a tiny, transient wake that folds back into the glassy flow. The rod is your primary instrument, a length of seasoned beach that reaches from the channel floor to just above your shoulder, and along its lower half a series of shallow notches have been cut with a fine saw and filled with dark wax to mark the standard depths. You know each notch by touch, by the way the wax plug feels slightly tacky under your thumb, and you can read them without looking while your eyes remain on the water. The light this far along the aqueduct has shifted again. The sun is higher, and the beams that fall through the ventilation slits are thinner and sharper, slanting down into the water at a steep angle and illuminating the channel floor in bright, wavering strips. Where the light hits the plaster beneath the water, you can see every detail, the pale terracotta color of the opus signinum, the faint hairline networks of old cracks now sealed with crystalline lime, the occasional small pebble that has settled in a shallow depression and now wears a thin coat of algae. The water itself is clear enough that these details are not distorted, but simply magnified, the pebble appearing larger and softer, its edges blurred by the constant, silent slide of the liquid lens. You pause to look at one such pebble, a small, dark ovoid that might have been washed in from the settling cistern upstream, and you bend to retrieve it, your fingers closing around the cold, smooth stone while the water pushes against your wrist. You drop the pebble into your satchel, a small, irrelevant sample that you will discard later, but for now it serves as a reminder of the small, quiet acts of attention that make up your day. You come to the first true measurement station of this section, a place where the spacus widens slightly and a bronze peg, heavy and green with patina, projects from the wall at precisely the height of a standard water level. Beside the peg, a small rectangular recess has been cut into the plaster, and inside it rests a ceramic tablet incised with the numerals of the ideal depth, a permanent record set against the transient readings you will take. You step close to the peg and run your finger over its cool, mottled surface, feeling the faint pitting of age, the smoothness where the metal has been polished by the sleeves of countless inspectors. The peg does not wobble. It is fixed firmly in the masonry, its tip pointing out over the water like a small, patient finger. You settle your stance, feet planted on the smooth plaster floor with the water swirling gently around your calves, and you lift the measuring rod, holding it vertically with the lower end just touching the surface of the water. The water closes around the tip with a tiny, silent dimple, and you let the rod slip downward, slowly, steadily, until the foot of the rod comes to rest on the channel floor with a soft, solid thump that you feel through the wood. The water, displaced by the rod, rises slightly and then settles, and you watch the surface against the notches. The depth reads 3 palms and a thumb's width. You lift the rod clear, water sheeting off in a smooth, transparent curtain, and then you lower it again, a second time, a third, each time letting it settle with the same slow, patient care. Because a single measurement is only a suggestion. It is the average of 3 that you trust. On the third lowering, you notice a tiny, almost imperceptible variation. The water surface quivers against the wax plug that marks the third palm, as if the level is just a hair's breadth higher than it was on the first measurement. You hold the rod steady and watch the surface, seeing how the light bends where it meets the wood, and you decide the difference is real but negligible, a fluctuation so small that it might be caused by a distant branch gate being opened or a slight surge from the springs. You lift the rod and make a note on your wax tablet, using the bronze stylus to scratch a small mark beside the numeral 3, adding a tiny upward-pointing arrow to indicate the fractional rise. The wax is soft and warm, and the stylus glides through it with a faint, greasy sound. From the peg's position, you know the water should be exactly 3 palms at this location, and the slight excess suggests the flow has increased overnight, perhaps due to rain in the hills, perhaps due to a reduction in draw-off from the city fountains. Neither possibility requires any action. The channel is designed to handle these slow seasonal drifts. You step back from the peg and look down the length of the spaces, watching the water surface for the tiny, telltale whirlpools that would indicate a hidden obstruction, a fallen piece of plaster, a dead bird, a tangle of twigs. The surface is a smooth, uninterrupted sheet, broken only by the faint, rippling reflection of the curved ceiling, and it moves with a single, unified purpose, the entire width of the channel sliding forward as one. You resume walking, the rod now tucked under your arm, while you use your eyes. The visual inspection is as important as the measured depth, because the water tells you things the rod cannot. You watch the way the light from the slits breaks on the surface, and you look for any place where the reflection shatters into chaotic, jumbled lines, a sign of turbulence from a submerged object. You watch the color of the water, which should be a clear, pale olive brown, and you look for any milky cloudiness that would indicate a collapse of the plaster upstream. You watch the very edge of the water line on the walls, where a faint dark tide mark of moisture separates the wet plaster from the dry, and you look for any sudden rise or fall in that line. All of these observations are slow, quiet, and patient. They require a kind of seeing that is almost like listening, a receptive stillness that allows the smallest detail to present itself. At the next slit, a beam of sunlight falls directly onto the water and reveals a fine, suspended cloud of tiny particles, specks of mineral dust and microscopic flecks of lime that drift in the current like a slow underwater constellation. You kneel, the water soaking your tunic to the waist, and you bring your face close to the surface, looking along the beam of light into the greenish depths. The particles move past you in smooth parallel trajectories, each one tracing a straight, unwavering line. There is no tumbling, no chaotic swirl, just a steady laminar procession that tells you the flow is clean and the gradient is true. You watch for a long, slow minute, letting your eyes lose focus until the particles become a soft, luminous haze, and then you blink and stand, the cold water streaming from your tunic in thin rivulets. You reach a second measurement peg, this one set slightly higher on the wall, indicating a section where the channel narrows and the water should be slightly deeper. You repeat the ritual, stance, rod lowered, 3 readings, the quiet whisper of the stylus on wax. The depth is 3 palms and 2 fingers, exactly as specified. You trace the numerals on the ceramic tablet, their sharp, angular strokes still crisp after all these years, and you feel a small private satisfaction in the match between the ancient inscription and the water's present height. It is not a loud satisfaction. It is a quiet, internal settling, like the soft click of a door closing perfectly in its frame. The channel continues, and as you walk, you become aware of the subtle, rhythmic quality of the measurement work. It is a cycle that repeats without urgency. Walk, watch, find the peg, stand, lower the rod, read, record, walk again. The cycle folds into the rhythm of your steps and the steady, hushing breath of the water, and after a while you lose track of how many pegs you have passed. You know that your tablet is filling with small, neat marks, each one a record of a single point along the long, curving spine of the aqueduct, and together these marks form a kind of quiet, numerical portrait of the morning. You come to a section where the channel floor has a visible, gentle upward slope, a deliberate rise built into the spacus to slow the water before it enters a bend. The water here is slightly shallower, and it moves with a quicker, more eager rush, its surface puckering into tiny, fleeting wrinkles. You wade into the faster current, feeling it push more firmly against your legs, and you take an extra measurement at the midpoint of the slope, lowering your rod to find that the depth has fallen to 2 palms and 3 fingers. You note this on your tablet, and also sketch a small simple diagram of the slope, a line that rises and then flattens. The diagram is crude, just a few scratches in the wax, but it will remind you to check this section after the next heavy rain, when the increased flow might scour the plaster. Beyond the slope, the channel widens again, and the water returns to its calm, glassy state. You find a third peg, this one accompanied by a small iron ring set into the wall at the waterline. The ring is for a portable depth gauge, a thin, graduated rod of bronze that is kept at the main castellum, but you have never needed it. Your wooden rod with its notches and wax plugs has always been sufficient. You touch the iron ring, feeling its cold, rough surface, the tiny flakes of rust that come off on your fingers, and you note that the ring is still secure, its lead corking intact. The morning is growing warmer now, and the air inside the spacus, though still cool, has lost its sharp early chill. The smell of wet lime is joined by the faint, sweet scent of warm stone, the smell of the sun on the outer masonry, and you can feel the day progressing even in this enclosed space. A small fly, its wings transparent and veined, drifts in through a ventilation slit and hovers over the water for a moment, its reflection a tiny dark speck on the bright surface. You watch it without moving, and after a time it lifts and disappears back into the outside brightness, leaving you alone with the water. You come to a place where a slow circular eddy has formed in a slight recess of the wall, a tiny lazy whirlpool no larger than your hand. The water rotates there with a quiet, deliberate patience, and a single pale fleck of foam spins at its center. You stop to examine the recess, running your hand over the plaster to feel for any irregularity, and you find a small, smooth indentation where a stone might have been patched centuries ago. The eddy is harmless, a trivial feature of the channel's geometry, but you watch it for a long moment, fascinated by the slow, silent rotation, the way the fleck of foam traces the same circle over and over without ever completing it. Then you move on, leaving the eddy to its quiet, eternal dance. The measurement work continues, each peg a small, calm milestone. You lower the rod, read the notches, record the depth. The numbers are almost always the same, varying by no more than a finger's width, and this consistency is itself a kind of quiet proof. The aqueduct is healthy, the springs are steady, the city is drinking its measured share. You think about the city, far away at the end of this long stone thread, and you imagine the water arriving at the fountains, splashing into the marble basins, filling the clay jars of the women who come at dawn. Your work here, in the cool dark channel, is the unseen first step in that long quiet delivery, and you are content to be unseen. You find a fourth peg, this one slightly loose in its socket, and you spend a few minutes pressing it back into place with your thumb, wedging a small chip of stone beside it to tighten the fit. The metal is cold and unyielding, and your thumb leaves a small, warm print on the patina. You test the peg with a gentle tug, and it holds firm. You note the repair on your tablet, drawing a small circle around the peg's number, and then you continue. The spacus begins a long, sweeping curve to the left, and as you follow it, the ventilation slits shift from the right wall to the left, a design feature that allows the morning light to enter from different angles as the aqueduct turns. The beams now fall across your path at a diagonal, painting bright slanted rectangles on the water and the opposite wall, and you walk through alternating bands of shadow and gold. The water in the light bands sparkles with 1,000 tiny dancing highlights, while the water in the shadows is a deep, still green, and the contrast is so gentle, so rhythmically repeated, that it becomes a kind of visual lullaby. You stop at a slit that offers a view of a distant hill, its slopes covered with the dark, dense green of ilex trees, and you see that the sky is a pale, washed blue, the color of a thrush's egg. A bird, perhaps a kestrel, hangs motionless on the wind, its wings a faint blur, and you watch it for a full minute, your breathing slow and even. Then you lower your gaze to the water and take another measurement, finding the depth unchanged, and you mark it with a small, tidy stroke. The rod is a comfort in your hand, its weight and balance so familiar that it feels like an extension of your arm. The notches are worn smooth by your grip, and the wax plugs have taken on the shape of your fingers. You think about the first time you held this rod many years ago, when you were a young apprentice learning the names of the arches and the feel of the plaster, and you realize that the rod has been with you so long it has become a part of your own history, a quiet, wooden witness to the thousands of measurements you have taken. You shift it to your other hand, feeling the cool, damp wood against your palm, and you walk on. The channel straightens, and ahead you see a patch of brighter light that marks a junction with a secondary branch, a small ceramic pipe that delivers water to a rural villa. The pipe is sealed with lime mortar, and the seal is dry and solid, with no sign of cracking or seepage. You run your thumb over the seal, feeling its fine, gritty texture, and you check that the flow through the branch is correct by listening at the pipe's mouth. The sound is a soft, high hiss, like a distant whisper, and it tells you that the water is moving freely, unobstructed. You make a quick note and move on. As you continue, the water begins to show the first signs of the morning's warmth. A few tiny bubbles cling to the plaster near the waterline, the dissolved air coming out of solution as the temperature rises. The bubbles are small and perfectly round, and they tremble slightly in the current. You touch one with your fingertip, and it pops with a tiny, soundless burst, leaving a minuscule wet circle on the plaster. You smile, a small private expression that no one sees, and then you resume your slow, steady walk. The measurement cycle continues, the pegs appearing at regular intervals, the rod lowered and lifted, the stylus moving across the wax. Your tablet is now half full, the marks neat and orderly, each one representing a single point of stillness in the long, flowing day. You pause to add a few more descriptive notes. The water is clear, the plaster sound, the gradient steady. The words are simple, almost boring, but they are the true language of the aqueduct, the quiet, factual prose that keeps the water flowing and the city alive. You come to a place where a small, shallow crack runs vertically down the wall, from the ceiling to just above the waterline. The crack is dry, sealed by the same crystalline lime that heals all the small wounds in the plaster, and it is as thin as a horsehair. You shine a beam of sunlight along it by positioning your hand, and you see that the crack does not go all the way through. It is a surface blemish, an old, faded scar. You note it anyway, because your notes are the memory of the aqueduct, and the aqueduct forgets nothing. The channel begins to slope downward very slightly, and you feel the gradient in the way your weight shifts forward onto the balls of your feet. The water quickens its pace, and its sound rises to a soft rushing whisper, a sound like the wind in distant leaves. You walk with it, letting the slope carry you, and you take an extra measurement at the steepest point, finding the depth still within the acceptable range. The rod feels steady in your hand, the water pushing gently against it, and when you lift it clear, a long, thin strand of water clings to the tip for a moment before falling back into the flow. At last the channel levels out, and you see the soft, diffuse glow of a settling cistern ahead, a wider chamber where the water will slow and spread and drop its burden of fine silt. You know your measurement work for this section is almost done, and you pause to look back along the long curved corridor you have walked, the row of slits receding into the distance like a string of pale luminous beads. The water behind you and before you moves with the same quiet eternal purpose, and you are simply a part of its passage, a temporary attentive presence in the cool dark body of the aqueduct. You shift the measuring rod to your other hand, pull out your tablet one more time, and add a final small notation, a summary of the morning's quiet, patient work, while the water murmurs its low ender song, and the sun continues its slow arc across the unseen sky. The Specus carries you out of the long, curving cut, and into a section where the walls on either side fall away, and quite suddenly you are no longer walking through the body of the earth, but through the open air. The transition is marked by a change in the light, which becomes brighter and more diffuse, and by a change in the sound of the water, which acquires a faint, distant echo that was not there before. You look up from the channel floor and see that the ventilation slits have become larger, taller, opening into wide, arched windows that face outward onto the morning. The aqueduct has risen onto a run of arches, a long, high arcade that strides across a shallow valley, and you are walking in the water channel above the fields, suspended between the pale sky and the dark green earth. The first thing you notice is the air. It moves through the larger openings with a gentle, persistent drift, a breeze that carries the scent of dry grass, warm earth, and the faint, sweet perfume of wild thyme. The breeze touches your face, cool and fresh, and it stirs the damp cloth of your tunic, making it flutter softly against your legs. After the still, humid closeness of the underground sections, the moving air is a quiet, refreshing presence, a reminder that the world outside is vast and alive. You pause at the first large window and place your hand on the sill, which is a single, long block of stone, worn smooth by wind and rain, and you lean slightly forward to look out. The view opens before you like a calm, unfurling scroll. The valley is a broad, gentle depression in the Campagna, its slopes covered with olive groves that form neat, regular grids of silver green. The trees are old, their trunks thick and twisted, and their leaves catch the morning sun in 1,000 tiny, glinting points. Between the groves lie squares of vineyard, where the vines are trained on low wooden stakes, and the leaves are a deep, dense green. Further out, the fields give way to open pasture, a pale, tawny gold dotted with the dark shapes of grazing sheep. The sheep move slowly, their bells a faint, intermittent chime that drifts up to you on the breeze. Beyond the pasture, the land rises again into low, rounded hills, and on the crest of the furthest hill stands a small, white farmhouse with a red-tiled roof, a thin column of smoke rising from its chimney and leaning gently to the east. You stand at the window for a long, slow moment, letting the view fill your eyes and the breeze cool your skin. The aqueduct arches march away to the left and right in a long, precise rhythm, their shadows falling across the stubble fields like a row of dark, elongated teeth. The shadow of each arch is a perfect, inverted mirror of the stone above, and the shadows are still sharp, the sun not yet high enough to blur their edges. You look down through the arch nearest to you and see the ground far below, a patch of bare, dusty earth where a small, solitary tree casts its own round pool of shade. The height is not dizzying, it is simply a fact, a quiet, solid elevation that places you between the earth and the sky, a part of the landscape, but also apart from it. You turn your gaze back to the water, which flows beside you unchanged. The current does not know it is suspended above the valley. It moves with the same steady, glassy glide, its surface smooth and dark. But here, in the arcaded section, the water catches the light differently, because the larger windows admit broad, slanting sheets of sunshine that fall across the channel and illuminate long, bright stretches of the plaster. The water in these bright stretches takes on a pale, luminous gold, and you can see through it to the floor with a perfect crystalline clarity. Every small irregularity in the plaster, every faint hairline crack, every tiny pebble is visible, and the water flows over them with a silent, liquid gentleness. You walk slowly along the arcade, your footsteps sounding slightly different here, the soft wet tread on plaster replaced by a faint hollow echo that reverberates through the stone arch beneath you. The arches themselves are a marvel of quiet, patient construction, each one a perfect semicircle of wedge-shaped stones that lean together in a mutual silent support. The stones are a warm ochre brown in the sun, and their surfaces are pitted and weathered, marked by the slow, patient work of rain and wind over more than a century. In the joints between the stones, small tufts of pale, dry moss have taken root, their color a soft gray-green that matches the olive leaves below. You come to a place where a bird has built a nest on a small projecting stone ledge just outside one of the windows. The nest is a neat, compact cup of dried grass, twigs, and a few wisps of sheep's wool, and it is empty now, its occupants perhaps fledged and gone. You stop to look at it, admiring the skill of its construction, the way the grass stems are woven together in a tight, secure basket that has withstood the wind and the rain. The nest is a small, temporary thing clinging to the ancient, enduring stone, and it reminds you that the aqueduct is not only a channel for water, but also a long, narrow world that shelters many small, quiet lives. You leave the nest undisturbed and continue your walk. The breeze strengthens slightly, and it brings with it the sound of a distant voice, a man calling to his animals perhaps, the words indistinct, but the tone calm and unhurried. The voice floats up to you, hangs in the air for a moment, and then fades, swallowed by the immense, quiet openness of the valley. You listen for more, but there is only the low, steady rush of the water and the soft, dry rustle of the wind in the dry grass below. The world is peaceful, and the day is unfolding in a slow, unremarkable way that you find deeply, quietly satisfying. You pause at another window and look down directly onto an olive grove that lies almost beneath the aqueduct. The trees are planted in straight rows, and you can see a narrow, dusty path running between them, a path that winds from the farmhouse on the hill down to a small stone well. A woman in a pale blue tunic is walking along the path carrying a clay water jar on her head, her posture straight and graceful. She moves with a slow, steady rhythm, and you watch her until she reaches the well, lowers the jar, and begins to draw water. The sound of the rope creaking on the stone lip of the well is too faint to hear, but you can imagine it, a small, familiar sound that belongs to the morning. She fills the jar, lifts it back onto her head, and begins the slow walk back to the farmhouse. And you watch her go, a small blue figure growing smaller and smaller, until she disappears among the trees. You turn back to the water and continue your inspection. The arcade runs straight here, and the arches repeat in a steady, calming procession. Each arch is a frame for a slightly different view. Here a patch of vineyard, there a stand of cypress trees, here a small dry stream bed filled with rounded white stones. The cypress trees are tall, dark, and slender, standing in a close group like a family of quiet sentinels, and their shadows fall across the pale grass in long, thin lines. The stream bed is a winding pale ribbon that glitters here and there where a patch of wet pebbles catches the sun, but no water runs in it now, and the stones are dry and dusty. You find a bronze inspection peg set into the wall at the midpoint of the arcade, and you stop to take a measurement. The water depth is unchanged, 3 palms exactly, the surface steady and true. You make a small mark on your tablet and then stand for a moment, the rod in your hand, listening to the quiet, layered sounds of the arcade. The water rushes with its constant, low voice, and beneath that sound, or woven through it, you can hear the soft, distant whisper of the wind moving through the olive leaves, the faint, intermittent bleating of the sheep, and the occasional sweet call of a bird. The sounds are separate, but also blended, a calm, harmonious murmur that has no urgency and no end. The sun climbs a little higher, and the light inside the channel becomes warmer, the shadows shortening and sharpening. The plaster on the wall opposite the windows catches the sun directly, and its color brightens to a rich, warm terracotta, the crushed tiles in the opus signinum glowing as though lit from within. You run your hand over the warm plaster, feeling its smooth, dry surface, and you notice that the warmth has brought out a faint, earthy smell, a smell like a sun-baked garden pot. The water, by contrast, remains cool, and the contrast between the warm wall and the cold current is a small sensory pleasure that you notice and then release. You walk on, and the arcade begins a very gentle, gradual curve to the right, following the contour of the valley. The curve is so wide and slow that you barely notice it, except that the row of windows ahead shifts slightly, the bright rectangles of light moving from the left wall to the center of the channel and then slowly toward the right. As the curve progresses, the view through the windows changes, the olive groves giving way to a wide, open pasture where a flock of sheep is grazing. The sheep are small, pale shapes that move slowly across the golden grass, and their bells make a soft, random music, a gentle, tuneless clanging that rises and falls with the breeze. You can see the shepherd, a small, dark figure sitting on a stone under a solitary oak tree, his staff across his knees, his dog lying at his feet. The dog is black and white, and it lifts its head as you watch, looks around, and then settles back down, its chin on its paws. The arcade continues its slow curve, and now you are looking out over a different part of the valley, a place where the land flattens into a wide, marshy patch of green reeds and dark, still water. The reeds are tall and dense, their feathery tops waving in the breeze, and the water among them is a dark, glassy brown that reflects the sky. A pair of ducks rises from the reeds, their wings making a soft, whistling sound, and they fly low across the marsh, their bodies dark against the pale blue sky. You watch them until they disappear behind a stand of trees, and then you turn your attention back to the channel. At the far end of the arcade, where the aqueduct prepares to enter the earth again, there is a small square inspection platform built out from the side of the channel. The platform is a flat stone slab surrounded by a low stone parapet, and it offers a wide panoramic view of the entire valley. You climb out of the specus through a narrow door and step onto the platform, the stone warm under your wet sandals. The sun is fully on your face now, and you close your eyes for a moment, feeling its warmth on your eyelids, your cheeks, your arms. The breeze is stronger out here, and it dries the dampness from your tunic, the cloth growing lighter and softer against your skin. You open your eyes and look back the way you have come. The arcade stretches away to the east, a long straight line of arches that diminishes into the distance. The furthest arches so small and pale they are almost invisible against the hazy hills. The water channel runs along the top of the arcade, a dark narrow slot that you have just walked, and you can trace its path all the way back to the point where it emerged from the low hill. The view is calm and orderly, a landscape shaped by human hands and human purpose, and yet it is also wild, the olive groves and vineyards giving way to open pasture and marsh, and the distant, untamed hills. You stand there for a long time, the measuring rod resting against your shoulder, your hands on the warm stone parapet, and you let the quiet, expansive peace of the valley settle into your bones. A small brown lizard scuttles across the parapet, pauses to look at you with one bright black eye, and then disappears into a crack in the stone. You smile at its small, busy energy, and then you turn and look ahead, where the aqueduct plunges back into the earth, the channel entering a dark, arched tunnel at the base of the next hill. The tunnel mouth is a rectangle of deep shadow, and you know that inside it the air will be cool and still again, the light dim and filtered through narrow slits. But for now, you are still in the open, still held in the warm, bright morning, and you are not quite ready to go inside. You sit down on the parapet, your back against a stone pillar, and you pull out your wax tablet. The notes you need to make are few: arcade section clear, water depth steady, plaster sound, no cracks or seepage observed. You write these words with slow, careful strokes, the stylus scratching quietly on the wax, and then you close the tablet and sit for a little longer, simply being still. The sun moves a fraction across the sky, and the shadow of the parapet shifts slowly across your sandals. The sheep bells chime their soft, random music, and the wind hums its low, steady note through the arches below you. After a while, you stand, brush the dust from your tunic, and pick up your rod. The day is moving forward, and there is still channel to walk, still water to measure, still the long, quiet rhythm of the inspection to follow. You take one last look at the valley, the patchwork of field and grove and pasture, the distant farmhouse with its thin column of smoke, the pale blue sky with its single drifting cloud, and then you turn, duck through the narrow door, and step back into the spacus. The air closes around you, cool and moist, and the sound of the water returns to its close, intimate hush. The arcade is behind you now, but its bright, airy calm remains in your mind, a quiet, luminous memory that you carry with you as you walk on into the dim, enclosing earth. The tunnel receives you with its familiar, cool darkness, the bright warmth of the arcade fading behind you as you step deeper into the earth. The ventilation slits here are narrow again, small and square, cut into the thick stone at long intervals, and the light they emit is a dim grey blue that barely reaches the surface of the water. You pause just inside the entrance to let your eyes adjust, the muscles around your pupils relaxing slowly, and the details of the spacus emerge from the gloom one by one. The smooth, dark curve of the plaster, the faint, pale line of the water surface, the row of slits receding into the distance like a string of dull, distant pearls. The air is still and cool, carrying the same clean mineral scent you have known all morning, and the water flows beside you with its constant, patient hush. You take a few steps forward, and as you move deeper into the tunnel, you notice that the plaster on the walls has a slightly different character here. The surface is still smooth and hard, but its color is darker, a deeper, richer red-brown, and along the waterline there runs a distinct pale band of deposit that catches the faint light. This is the calcium carbonate, the lime scale that the water carries out of the hills and lays down, layer upon slow layer, on the walls and floor of the channel. You have seen it many times before, in many sections of the aqueduct, but here it is thicker, more developed, a soft, encrusting blanket that tells a quiet story about the source of the water and the long, patient chemistry of the springs. You kneel in the water, the cold liquid closing around your waist, and you bring your lamp close to the wall. In its warm golden glow, the lime scale reveals itself as a complex, delicate formation. It is pale cream in color, sometimes almost white, and its surface is undulating like a frozen miniature landscape of low hills and smooth valleys. The scale is thickest right at the waterline, forming a distinct, raised shelf that projects a finger's width out from the plaster, and it tapers away both upward and downward, feathering into a thin, hard crust that is barely visible. Where the scale is thick, it has a slight, translucent quality, a depth that reminds you of old yellowed ivory or the cloudy edge of a piece of glass that has been buried for a long time. You run your finger over the scale, feeling its texture. It is not slimy or soft. It is hard and slightly rough, like very fine sandstone, and it adheres tightly to the plaster beneath. The surface is covered with tiny, irregular ripples, as though the flowing water has sculpted it over the years, shaping the mineral deposit into a series of low, parallel ridges that follow the direction of the current. You press your thumbnail into the scale at its thickest point, and it resists, firm and unyielding. It would take a chisel to remove it, or a long, patient scraping with an iron spatula, but the thickness is still within the acceptable range, not yet narrowing the channel enough to slow the flow. You make a note on your tablet, lime scale at sector 31, thickness 1 finger, no action required, monitor next season. The scale is a record of the water's journey from the springs. The aqueduct that you walk carries water from a group of springs in the limestone hills, the Anio Valley source, and that water emerges from the earth already heavy with dissolved minerals, the invisible cargo of calcium and magnesium that the rain has leached from the rock over centuries. When the water rises from the deep, dark aquifer, it is cold and clear, and tastes faintly of stone. And as it flows along the long, winding channel toward the city, it slowly releases its dissolved load, depositing it on the plaster in thin, almost imperceptible layers. Each layer is a fraction of a hair's width, laid down over a season or a year, and the scale you see now is the accumulation of many years, a quiet, patient testimony to the passage of time and the constancy of the flow. You stand, the water streaming from your tunic, and you walk slowly along the channel, your lamp held close to the wall. The scale continues without interruption, a pale, undulating ribbon that runs parallel to the water surface, and you observe its variations. In some places it is thinner, almost absent, where the plaster has been repaired or replaced, and the scale has not yet had time to re-establish itself. In other places it is thicker, forming a distinct overhanging lip that curls slightly outward, and you note these locations carefully because they will eventually need to be chiseled back to prevent the scale from cracking and falling into the water in heavy flakes. A fallen piece of scale is not dangerous, but it can lodge in a distribution pipe or a settling basin grating, and so it must be managed with the same quiet, patient attention that you give to every other detail of the aqueduct. You reach a place where the scale has formed a small, delicate stalactite that hangs down from the ceiling, directly above a tiny, almost invisible crack in the plaster. The stalactite is no longer than your little finger, a thin, pale, brittle tube of mineral that has grown, drip by slow drip, over many seasons. You reach up and break it off carefully, catching it in your palm, and you examine it in the lamplight. It is hollow, a tiny perfect straw of calcium carbonate, and its outer surface is ringed with faint, parallel lines, like the growth rings of a tree. You roll it between your fingers, feeling its fragility, and then you let it fall into the water, where it floats for a moment before sinking into the dark, sliding current. The springs themselves are far away, a full day's walk to the east, in a fold of the limestone hills where the water rises from a deep, underground reservoir. You have visited them only a few times, but you remember them clearly. A cool, shaded basin surrounded by old, mossy stones, the water welling up from the dark earth with a silent, ceaseless energy that is both gentle and powerful. The basin is always full, the water spilling over a low stone lip into the beginning of the aqueduct channel, and the air there is cool and damp, and smells of wet fern and ancient stone. The springs are the true beginning of everything you inspect, the quiet, hidden source of the long, murmuring thread that you follow day after day. And whenever you see the lime scale on the walls, you think of that cool green place and the water rising, endless and patient, from the deep heart of the hills. The tumult continues, and the scale accompanies you like a pale, silent companion. Its color shifts slightly as you walk, from cream to a pale grayish white to a warm buttery yellow, the variations caused by tiny differences in the mineral content of the water or the plaster. You note these color changes on your tablet, along with a small sketch of the thickest deposits, your stylus tracing the undulating line of the scale with a slow, careful hand. The sketch is simple, just a few curving lines in the soft wax, but it will help the repair crews locate the areas that need attention, and it will be added to the long, growing archive of drawings and notes that the Water Office keeps in its quiet, dusty records room. You pause at a slit and look out, but there is little to see. A narrow view of a steep, grassy bank, a few wild flowers growing close to the stone, their petals a bright, cheerful yellow that seems startling after the dim, monochrome world of the channel. The bank is covered with a dense tangle of dry grass and small thorny shrubs, and you can hear the faint dry rustle of a lizard moving through the undergrowth. The outside air that drifts through the slit is warm and sweet, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth, and you breathe it in for a moment before turning back to the cool, moist darkness. The lime scale continues, and you begin to notice the small, subtle ways in which it interacts with the flowing water. Where the scale is thickest, the water's surface is slightly disturbed, a faint, almost invisible ripple that runs along the waterline like a fine liquid thread. The ripple is so small you can barely see it, but you can hear it, a very faint, high, whispering sound, like the softest possible rustle of silk that adds a new delicate layer to the low, steady rush of the current. You kneel again and listen, your ear close to the water, and the sound is there, distinct and tiny, a quiet liquid breath that speaks of the slow, patient shaping of the stone. You think about the chemistry of the scale, the quiet, invisible process that transforms the dissolved minerals into solid stone. The water carries the calcium bicarbonate in solution, clear and invisible, and as it flows along the channel, the water releases a tiny amount of carbon dioxide into the air, a slow, gentle exhalation that shifts the balance of the chemistry and causes the calcium carbonate to precipitate out as a solid. It is a process so slow that a human eye cannot see it happening, only its results, only the pale, hard crust that accumulates year by year, layer by layer, in a rhythm as patient and as steady as the flow of the water itself. The scale is a kind of slow mineral memory, a physical record of the water's long journey from the dark earth to the sunlit city, and you are one of the few people who ever see it, who ever touch it, who ever note its thickness and its color in a small wax tablet on a quiet morning. You rise and continue walking, the lamp casting its small, warm circle on the wall. The tunnel is straight and featureless, and the only variation is the slow, subtle thickening and thinning of the scale, the occasional small stalactite, the faint parallel ripples in the deposit that show the direction of the current. The water flows beside you with its constant, steady voice, and your footsteps make their soft, wet sound on the plaster floor. You are aware of a deep, quiet peace settling over you, a sense of being enclosed in a long, narrow world that is perfectly calm and perfectly ordered, a world where the only things that matter are the water, the stone, and the slow, patient work of observation and record-keeping. You come to a place where the scale has been chiseled away at some point in the past, leaving a patch of bare, clean plaster that is a bright, startling red-brown against the pale cream crust. The edges of the chiseled area are sharp and clean, the work of a skilled hand, and you run your fingers over the transition, feeling the slight, rough edge where the scale ends. The bare plaster is smooth and cool, and it has already begun to acquire a thin, almost invisible film of new scale, a delicate, transparent wash that will in time grow thick and pale like the rest. You note the location of the old repair and add a small positive comment, repair holding, rescale minimal. Beyond the chiseled patch, the tunnel begins to slope very gently downward, and the water quickens its pace slightly, its sound rising to a soft, eager rush. The lime scale on the walls becomes thinner, perhaps because the faster water deposits its minerals less readily, or perhaps because the plaster here is of a slightly different composition, with less affinity for the calcium carbonate. You note the thinning without comment, simply marking it on your mental map of the channel, and you adjust your pace to match the slightly faster flow. The tunnel continues, and you feel a faint, cool draft on your face, a breath of air that comes from somewhere ahead, perhaps from a junction with another tunnel or from a ventilation shaft that opens onto the hillside. The draft carries a scent of damp earth and, very faintly, the sweet green smell of ferns, and you know that you are approaching a section where the aqueduct runs close to the surface, the earth above you thinning to a mere skin of soil and grass. The light from the slits grows slightly brighter, confirming your sense, and the lime scale on the walls takes on a pale greenish tinge where tiny microscopic algae have found a foothold in the damp, dim environment. You pause to examine the greenish stain, touching it with your fingertip. It is not thick or slimy, just a faint dry discoloration that rubs off as a pale, powdery dust. The algae are harmless, a natural consequence of the slightly increased light, and they do not affect the water quality or the integrity of the plaster. You note their presence on your tablet, adding a small parenthetical observation. Light green stain, sector 35, non-structural. The day outside is warming, and even here in the cool, dark tunnel, you can feel the slow, subtle rise in temperature. The water, however, remains cold, its temperature constant and unchanging, insulated by the earth and the stone. The contrast between the cool water around your ankles and the slightly warmer air on your face is a quiet sensory reminder of the different worlds that meet in the aqueduct, the deep, cold underground springs, and the warm, bright, sunlit surface, the ancient, enduring stone, and the fleeting, temporary lives of the people who walk within it. You come to a small iron inspection door set into the side of the tunnel, its surface dark with age and pitted with rust. The door is slightly ajar, and you push it open, revealing a narrow vertical shaft that rises straight upward into the darkness. The shaft is a ventilation and access chimney, its walls lined with rough stone blocks that have small projecting handholds for climbing. You look up into the shaft and see a tiny, bright circle of blue sky far above, a perfect, luminous disk that is the color of a robin's egg. A rope, old and frayed, hangs down from the top of the shaft, its end swinging gently in the faint draught. You do not climb it. Your work is here, in the water channel, but you look up at the sky for a moment, a small, distant reminder of the vast open world above, before closing the door and continuing along the tunnel. The lime scale thins further as you walk, and eventually it becomes a mere trace, a faint pale blush on the plaster that is barely visible even in the lamplight. The channel here has been recently repaired, the plaster renewed within the last few years, and the scale has not yet had time to re-establish itself in any significant thickness. The new plaster is slightly lighter in color than the old, a warm pinkish terracotta that will darken with age, and its surface is perfectly smooth without a single crack or blemish. You run your hand over it appreciatively, feeling the flawless cool surface, and you note the quality of the repair on your tablet. New plaster, sector 37, excellent condition. The tunnel begins to curve to the left, and the light ahead grows steadily brighter, a soft, diffuse glow that tells you another arcade or an open section is approaching. The lime scale, what little remains of it, catches the increased light and glows with a pale, creamy luminescence, and the water's surface brightens to a clear, pale green. You walk toward the light, your pace slow and steady, and you feel a quiet, gentle anticipation, not excitement, but a calm, pleasant expectation of the open air and the wide views that await. The tunnel has been cool and dark and peaceful, and the lime scale has told its slow, silent story of the deep hills and the patient, mineral-rich water. But now the morning calls you outward again, into the sun and the breeze and the long, quiet arcades that stretch across the waiting fields. The tunnel releases you into a wider space, the walls falling back and the ceiling lifting until you can stand fully upright, your spine straightening with a quiet, grateful release of tension you had not noticed you were holding. The sound of the water changes first, its steady rush softening and spreading into a deep, liquid quiet, and then the light changes. the narrow directed beams from the ventilation slits giving way to a diffuse grey-green glow that seems to come from everywhere at once. You have entered a settling cistern, one of the piscinae limariae that punctuate the aqueduct at intervals along its length, and you pause just inside the entrance to let the space reveal itself to you. The cistern is a large rectangular chamber with a high barrel-vaulted ceiling that curves overhead in a smooth, unbroken arch. The plaster that lines the walls and ceiling is the same dark, polished opus sininum that you have walked beside all morning, but here its color is richer, deeper, almost a burgundy in the dim light, and its surface has a faint, glassy sheen that reflects the water below in a soft, distorted mirror. The ceiling vault is supported by the thick, solid walls, and at the apex of the curve, a small, square ventilation shaft opens to the sky, admitting a column of pale, filtered daylight that falls straight down into the center of the basin. The column of light is hazy with fine, suspended dust, and where it meets the water, it creates a bright, circular patch of illumination that fades gradually into the surrounding dimness. The water itself is different here. In the narrow spacus, the water is a flowing, living thing, a constant sliding presence that moves with purpose and direction. Here in the cistern, it has spread out and slowed to an almost complete stillness, filling the broad rectangular basin from wall to wall with a surface that is as flat and dark as a sheet of polished obsidian. The basin is deep, designed to hold a large volume of water, and the stillness allows the fine, suspended silt and sand that the current carries to drift slowly downward and settle on the floor. The water in the cistern does not rush or murmur. It barely whispers, a faint, almost inaudible sound of slow, gentle exhalation that seems to come from the stone itself. You walk forward onto the narrow inspection ledge, a shelf of smooth, worn stone that runs along the side of the basin just above the water line. The ledge is barely wide enough for your feet, and you move along it with a slow, careful sideways step, your left hand resting lightly on the cool plaster of the wall. The water is close, very close, its surface level with your shins, and you can look down into it as you would look down into a well. The depth is impossible to gauge in the dim light, the water growing darker and darker until it fades into a deep, featureless black that might be an arm's length down or might be many times your height. The stillness of the surface is so complete that it reflects the vaulted ceiling with a perfect inverted clarity, and for a moment you have the disorienting sense that you are walking along the edge of a great dark void suspended between two identical curved chambers. You stop at the midpoint of the ledge and simply look. The surface of the water is a mirror, but a mirror with a strange, liquid depth, and the reflected ceiling seems to hang below you like a submerged, upside-down cathedral. The ventilation shaft above is reflected as a small dark square below, and the column of light that falls through it continues downward into the water as a pale, shimmering pillar that vanishes into the darkness. Tiny motes of dust drift in the light, both above the surface and below it, their reflections moving in perfect, silent synchrony with their sources. The only movement in the entire chamber is the slow, almost imperceptible drift of these dust motes, and, very faintly, the gentle, rhythmic pulse of the water as it breathes with the distant, steady pressure of the flow entering and leaving the basin. You kneel on the ledge, the stone cold and hard under your knees, and you reach down to touch the surface of the water with the tips of your fingers. The water is colder than you expected, colder than the flowing channel, and the coldness seems to bite for a moment before your fingers adjust. The surface resists slightly, as still water does, forming a tiny elastic dimple around your fingertips before yielding and letting them slide through. You hold your fingers just below the surface, feeling the deep, silent cold of the water, the utter stillness of it, and you sense rather than feel the vast, slow weight of the volume that fills the basin. The water does not flow past your fingers. It simply surrounds them, still and patient. A dark, liquid sleep that has been resting here for a long, quiet time. You withdraw your hand and watch the tiny ripples you have created spread outward in perfect concentric circles, their crests catching the light and then fading, the surface returning to its flawless, glassy stillness. The ripples are the only disturbance, and they are small and gentle, vanishing into the walls of the basin as though absorbed. You dry your fingers on the hem of your tunic, which is already wet, and you continue your slow, careful walk along the ledge toward the far end of the cistern. The floor of the basin, where it is visible near the edges, is covered with a layer of fine, pale brown sediment that has settled out of the water over many months. The sediment is soft and fine, almost like a silken dust, and it lies in a smooth, even blanket that thickens toward the center of the basin. Where the light falls on the sediment, it shows a pale, golden-brown color, like fine, dry sand, and you can see the faint, parallel lines of the underlying plaster through the deposit. The sediment is the reason for the cistern's existence, the quiet, patient trap that catches the sand and silt and tiny, suspended particles that the water carries from the hills, preventing them from reaching the city's pipes and fountains. Every particle that settles here is a particle that will not clog a distribution grate or cloud a drinking cup, and the cistern does its work in perfect, silent stillness, asking for nothing but the slow, gentle gift of time. At the far end of the basin, a bronze grating is set into the wall at the point where the water exits the cistern and returns to the narrow spakers. The grating is a rectangular frame of heavy cast bronze, its surface green with age and mottled with the dark, irregular patterns of the patina, and inside the frame a series of vertical bars, each as thick as your thumb, stand side by side with a narrow, precise gap between them. The bars are smooth and cool, worn slightly at their centers where the water has flowed past them for decades, and they are free of any obstruction. You run your fingers over each bar in turn, feeling the cool, solid metal, the faint, vertical grooves of the casting, the smooth, worn patches where the water has polished the bronze to a dull, golden gleam. No leaves, no twigs, no fallen pieces of plaster have lodged against the bars, and the water flows through them with a deep, silent ease, the surface on the downstream side of the grating resuming its glassy, even flow. You check the seal around the edge of the grating, pressing your fingertips against the joint where the bronze frame meets the plaster. The seal is made of a hard, grey, waterproof mortar that has cracked slightly in a few places, the cracks hair-thin and stable, and you note them on your tablet with a small, careful diagram. The cracks do not leak. The water pressure here is low, and the mortar still holds firm, but the repair will need to be done eventually, perhaps next season, perhaps the season after. You make a note to mention it in your report, and then you turn your attention back to the basin. The light from the ventilation shaft has shifted slightly, the column of daylight moving a fraction across the water as the sun climbs higher, and where the light now falls, it illuminates a small floating speck of something pale. The speck is a moth, a small white-winged moth that has somehow found its way into the cistern and now floats on the surface of the water, its wings spread flat, its body still. The moth is dead, or perhaps only stunned, and it drifts with the almost imperceptible current, moving in a slow, silent circle near the center of the basin. You watch it for a moment, the tiny pale speck turning and turning in the column of light, and then you look up at the ceiling. High above, near the ventilation shaft, another moth flutters against the plaster, its wings a pale, dusty blur, its shadow flickering on the curved surface. The moth circles the shaft, drawn by the light, and its movement is the only sign of life in the entire, still chamber. You watch the moth for a long, slow minute, your breathing shallow and quiet. The moth flutters upward, touches the edge of the shaft, and then flutters downward again, its path a soft, aimless spiral that seems to have no beginning and no end. Its shadow moves on the water below, a dark, dancing twin that mirrors every turn, and the two moths, the real one above and the reflected one below, perform a slow, silent dance that is strangely beautiful. Then the moth finds the shaft and climbs upward, disappearing into the bright blue square of sky, and you are left alone with the still water and the quiet, settling dust. You complete your circuit of the ledge, returning to the entrance where the narrow spacus resumes its course. The water in the cistern has shown you everything it needs to show you. The sediment is deep, but not excessive. The grating is clear. The seals are mostly sound, and the stillness of the basin is perfect and undisturbed. You make a final note on your tablet, a brief summary of the cistern's condition, and then you close the tablet and slide it back into your satchel. The inspection of the Piscina Limaria is complete. You pause before leaving and look back at the chamber one more time. The column of light still falls through the shaft, the dust still drifts in slow, silent spirals, and the water still holds its dark, perfect stillness. The cistern has a quality of deep, suspended time, a sense that nothing here is changed for many years, and nothing will change for many more, and you feel a quiet, reverent appreciation for the calm, patient work that this chamber performs. It is a place of waiting, of settling, of slow, quiet accumulation, and it is as essential to the aqueduct as the rushing channels and the high arcades. You nod slightly, a small private gesture of respect, and then you step back into the spacus. The transition is immediate. The water around your ankles quickens, the sound of the flow returns to its steady, hushing voice, and the walls close in around you once more. The cool, moist air of the channel feels fresh after the deep, still cold of the cistern, and you walk forward with a renewed, quiet energy. The settling cistern is behind you now, but its stillness remains with you, a calm, dark presence that you carry in your mind as you continue along the long, winding channel, the water flowing beside you with its constant, patient, eternal purpose. Beyond the settling cistern, the spacus runs straight and narrow for a considerable distance, the walls close and the ceiling low, and you settle back into the familiar stoop, the rhythm of your footsteps soft and wet on the plaster floor. The water flows beside you with its constant glassy murmur, and the ventilation slits admit their regular pale rectangles of light, each one a quiet marker of another 4 paces walked. The lime scale on the walls is thin here, a mere trace, and the plaster is smooth and dark, the color of dried terracotta in shadow. You walk without hurry, your measuring rod balanced on your shoulder, your tablet warm against your hip, and you listen to the small layered sounds of the aqueduct, the low rush of the water, the faint creak of stone expanding in the distant warmth, the soft, wet suck of your sandals lifting from the channel floor. After a time, the light ahead changes. It becomes warmer, more diffuse, and you can see that the specus is opening into a wider chamber, a space that is not a cistern, but something else, a place where the straight line of the channel is interrupted by a series of low, arched openings set into the left-hand wall. The chamber is a distribution node, a junction point where the main flow of the aqueduct is divided, and as you step into it, you feel the water around your ankles slow and spread, the current softening as the channel widens to accommodate the branching pipes. The air in the chamber is cool and still, carrying the familiar scent of wet lime, but there is also a faint metallic note, a hint of lead and bronze and old, damp metal that speaks of the pipes and fittings that are hidden in the walls. You stop just inside the entrance and look around. The chamber is a rectangular space, larger than the spacus but smaller than the settling cistern, its ceiling a low barrel vault that curves overhead in a smooth, unbroken arch. The walls are lined with the same dark, polished opus synonym, but here the plaster is interrupted by a series of lead pipes that emerge from the masonry at waist height, each pipe sealed into the wall with a thick grey collar of hydraulic mortar. The pipes are dark and dull, their surface is a soft matte grey that has developed a pale whitish patina over the years, and they project a short distance from the wall before turning downward and disappearing into the floor. Each pipe is a branch, a separate watercourse that carries its measured share of the flow to a different destination, a private villa, a public bath, a fountain in a small rural town. You walk slowly along the wall, your eyes moving from pipe to pipe. The first branch is a modest one, a lead pipe no wider than your wrist, its collar smooth and intact. You place your palm against the pipe and feel a faint, steady vibration, a deep, low hum that tells you the water is moving through it under pressure, silent and constant. The pipe is cool, colder than the air, and the vibration is so subtle you might imagine it, but you know it is real, the quiet hidden pulse of the aqueduct's lifeblood flowing away into the countryside. You check the seal around the collar, running your fingertips over the hard grey mortar, feeling for any softness or crumbling. The seal is firm, dry and unbroken, and you nod slightly and move on. The second pipe is larger, a thick, heavy cylinder of lead that feeds a public fountain in a market town to the south. The pipe is secured to the wall with an iron strap that has rusted to a dark, rough brown, and you test the strap with a gentle tug, finding it still solid, the iron holding firm despite its age. The lead itself has a beautiful, subtle quality in the dim light. Its surface is covered with a fine, pale bloom, a delicate whitish crust that forms naturally on old lead and protects the metal beneath. You run your finger over the bloom and feel its slight, powdery texture, like the skin of a plum, and you note that the pipe is in good condition, the metal sound, the bloom undisturbed by any crack or seepage. You continue along the wall, checking each branch in turn. Some of the pipes are ancient, their surfaces deeply pitted and mottled with the marks of time, while others are newer, their lead still a dark, smooth grey, their collars still sharp-edged and fresh. The older pipes have a quiet, settled presence, as though they have become part of the stone itself, and you feel a small, quiet respect for the hands that installed them, hands that have long since returned to the earth. You pull out your tablet and make a note of each pike's condition, your stylus moving slowly and carefully across the wax, recording the small, precise details: collar sound, strap firm, no seepage, bloom intact. At the third pipe, you pause and look more closely. This branch is a smaller one, a narrow ceramic pipe rather than lead, its surface a pale warm buff color that stands out against the dark plaster. The ceramic pipe is a calyx, a calibrated nozzle that measures and restricts the flow to a precise legal volume, ensuring that the water delivered to the villa it serves is exactly the amount that has been paid for and registered. The calyx is a simple, elegant device, a short, tapered tube of fired clay, its inner diameter carefully sized to allow a specific flow rate, its outer surface stamped with the official seal of the Water Office and the name of the magistrate who authorized it. The stamp is a circular impression, the letters small and precise, and you run your thumb over it, feeling the raised, crisp edges of the numerals and the symbol of the crossed trident. You lean closer to the calyx and listen. The sound it makes is different from the low, silent hum of the lead pipes, a soft, high hiss like a distant whispering voice, the sound of water being forced through a narrow opening under a gentle, steady pressure. The hiss is constant and smooth, with no sputtering or gurgling, and it tells you that the calyx is clear, the flow unobstructed, the measurement true. You hold your breath and listen for a long moment, letting the soft, sibilant note fill your ears, and then you nod and make a note on your tablet. Calyx at sector 40, flow steady, seal intact. The distribution node is a place of quiet, hidden order, a point where the great single river of the aqueduct is divided into many small, precise streams, each one measured and controlled and directed to its appointed place. The water does not complain or resist. It simply flows, following the paths that the pipes offer, filling the dark, hidden channels that lead away into the earth and toward the distant, waiting fountains and cisterns and bathhouses. You think about the people who will draw this water, the women at the fountains, the farmers watering their animals, the bathers in the public thermae, and you realize that none of them will ever see this quiet, dim chamber, or know the work that goes on here. The distribution node is a hidden, essential heart, beating slowly and silently beneath the ground. You come to the largest branch of all, a thick, heavy pipe that emerges from the wall at a slight downward angle and runs along the floor for a short distance before plunging into a deep, square sump. The pipe feeds a major spur aqueduct that serves a cluster of wealthy villas on the lower slopes of the hills, and its flow is controlled by a bronze sluice gate set into the wall just above it. The sluice gate is a rectangular frame of heavy cast bronze, and inside it a flat vertical plate can be raised or lowered by turning a threaded bronze rod. The rod is thick and sturdy, its surface worn smooth by many hands, and at its top is a simple cross-shaped handle that an inspector can grip and turn. You step closer to the sluice gate and examine it carefully. The bronze is dark with age, a deep, rich brown that is almost black in the shadows, and its surface is marked with a fine, irregular pattern of scratches and wear. The threaded rod is greased with a thin, dark smear of animal fat, and you touch it with your fingertip, feeling the slippery, cool grease. The gate itself is slightly open, raised by a precise amount that corresponds to the authorized flow, and the water pours through the opening with a deep, throaty chuckle, a sound that is lower and more resonant than the soft hiss of the calyces. You place your hand on the bronze frame and feel the steady, powerful vibration of the water rushing through, a vibration that travels up your arm and into your chest. You check the position of the gate against the official record that is carved into a small stone tablet set into the wall beside it. The tablet is old, its surface worn, but the numerals are still legible, and they tell you that the gate should be opened by exactly 3 fingers' widths. You measure the gap with your fingers, pressing them into the narrow space between the gate and the frame, and you find that the opening is exactly 3 fingers' widths, precise and true. The water has not been tampered with, the flow has not been altered, and the villa owners are receiving exactly their due. You make a note of this on your tablet, adding a small positive mark beside the record. Beyond the sluice gate, a narrow inspection passage branches off the main chamber, a low dark tunnel that follows the large pipe for a short distance before ending at a small square access hatch. You crouch and enter the passage, your back scraping against the rough stone ceiling, and you follow the pipe to the hatch. The hatch is a heavy iron door set into the floor, and you lift it with a grunt, the hinges creaking softly. Below you can see the pipe disappearing into a deep dark shaft, and you can hear the distant echoing sound of water falling into a cistern far below. The sound is faint and musical, a soft, liquid chime that rises up the shaft and fades into the air. You listen for a moment, confirming that the flow is uninterrupted, and then you lower the hatch and return to the main chamber. The distribution node is almost complete now, and you make your way back along the wall, checking the final few branches. A very small pipe, no thicker than your thumb, feeds a single drinking fountain at a crossroads shrine, and you pause to listen to its tiny silvery trickle, a sound so delicate it is almost lost in the low rush of the main channel. Another pipe, this one sealed with a heavy lead plug, has been disconnected. The villa it once served perhaps abandoned or demolished, and you note the plug's condition, finding it firm and watertight. Each branch has its own small story, its own quiet place in the great complex network of the aqueduct, and you record each one with the same slow, patient care. At last, you return to the main spacious, the narrow, familiar channel that continues its long, straight path toward the city. The distribution node falls behind you, its dark, quiet chamber and its humming, hissing pipes fading into the dimness, but the sense of order and precision that it embodies stays with you. The water flows beside you, still whole, still undiminished, the great central volume that has not yet been divided, and you walk on, your footsteps soft and wet, your tablet full of small, careful notes. The morning continues its slow, quiet unfolding, and the aqueduct carries you deeper into the calm, patient work of the day. The distribution node recedes behind you until its chamber becomes a soft grey memory, and the spacious narrows again, the walls drawing close, and the ceiling settling into its familiar low arch that asks you to stoop. The water, which had spread and slowed among the branching pipes, now gathers itself and resumes its steady, glassy slide, the current firm and even around your ankles. You walk out of the junction and into a long, straight section of channel that runs through a low hill. The ventilation slits few and small, the light a dim, grey-green wash that barely touches the water. The air is cool and still, carrying the same clean mineral scent of wet lime and old stone, and your footsteps make their soft, wet rhythm on the plaster floor. After a time, the light ahead begins to brighten, and you feel a faint, warm draft on your face, a breath of air that smells of dry grass and sun-warmed earth. The channel straightens, the walls fall away, and quite suddenly you are out in the open again, the spacus becoming a high arcade that strides across a wide, flat plain. The arches here are the longest run on the whole aqueduct, a continuous unbroken line of stone that stretches so far into the distance that the far end dissolves into a pale, hazy shimmer. You pause at the first large window and look out, and the view is a vast open expanse of golden brown plain, dotted here and there with the dark green of scattered olive trees and the pale dusty lines of cart tracks. The sun is fully up now, a warm white gold disk that hangs in the eastern sky and pours its light across the landscape without shadow or mercy. The stone of the arches has absorbed the heat, and the air inside the channel is warmer than it has been all morning, a soft, dry warmth that carries the scent of baked earth and the faint, sweet perfume of wild herbs. The plaster on the walls, which was cool and damp in the early hours, is now dry and faintly warm to the touch, its color a pale, dusty terracotta that seems to glow in the indirect light. The water, however, remains cool, its temperature constant and refreshing, and the contrast between the warm air on your face and the cold water around your ankles is a quiet, steady comfort. You begin to walk. The arcade stretches before you in a long, straight line, the arches repeating with a perfect, monotonous regularity. Each arch is exactly the same size and shape, a semicircle of pale, weathered stone that frames a rectangle of bright blue sky and golden plain. The piers between the arches are thick and solid, their brick facing a warm ochre brown, and the shadows they cast fall in a regular, repeating pattern across the stubble fields below. The rhythm of the arches is so steady, so unvarying, that after a few hundred paces it becomes a kind of quiet, visual pulse, a slow, silent beat that matches the rhythm of your footsteps and the steady, hushing breath of the water. You walk without hurry, your pace slow and even, your eyes moving from the water to the wall to the distant view and back again. The water flows beside you at exactly the same speed and depth it has maintained all morning, its surface a smooth, dark green sheet that reflects the ceiling in a blurred, wavering line. The only sound is the constant, low rush of the current, a sound that is so continuous and so unchanging that it becomes a kind of silence, a background hum that your ears accept and then forget. Occasionally a small dry breeze moves through the arcade, stirring the dust on the ledges and carrying the distant faint sound of a sheep bell or a bird call. But these sounds are thin and far away, swallowed almost instantly by the immense open quiet of the plain. The view through the windows changes very slowly as you walk. The plain is not entirely flat. It undulates in long, gentle swells, and the aqueduct follows the contour with a subtle, almost imperceptible curve that you notice only because the distant arches seem to shift slightly against the horizon. The olive groves come and go, their silver-green leaves shimmering in the heat, and between them the ground is a pale, dusty gold, covered with dry grass and the occasional dark, sprawling bush of a thorny shrub. In the far distance a line of low blue hills marks the edge of the plain, and above them the sky is a pale, washed blue, cloudless and immense. You walk, and the arches continue. You lose track of how many you have passed. At first you try to count them, a quiet, mental game to mark the distance, but the numbers grew and blurred, and after a while you let them go. The counting had become a soft, rhythmic chant in your mind, a sequence that rose and fell with your steps, but now it has faded into a wordless rhythmic awareness, a sense of forward motion that has no need of numbers. The arches are simply there, one after the other, each one a quiet stone frame for a small passing moment of the morning, and you walk through them as you would walk through the pages of a slow, calm book. The warmth of the day continues to rise, and you feel a thin line of sweat forming on your temples and along your spine. The sun falls directly on the top of the aqueduct, heating the stone above you, and the air inside the spaces grows thick with the smell of warm lime and ancient dust. You pause at a window and lean against the sill, feeling the hot stone under your palms, and you look down at the plain below. The heat is visible there, a faint shimmering haze that rises from the ground and makes the distant trees tremble. A small brown lizard is sunning itself on the outer stonework, its body flat and still, its tiny black eye watchful. You watch it for a moment, and then it flicks its tail and vanishes into a crack, leaving you alone with the heat and the silence. You walk on, and the arcade continues its long, straight march. The monotony of the arches is not tedious, it is calming, a gentle, repetitive rhythm that soothes the mind and allows it to drift. Your thoughts become slow and loose, floating on the steady, quiet flow of the water and the regular, silent beat of the arches. You think about the plain below, the grasses growing and dying, the olive trees bearing their fruit, the slow, patient work of the seasons. The aqueduct has stood here through all of it, through hot summers and cold winters, through rain and drought, and it will stand here long after you are gone. The thought is not sad. It is simply a fact, a quiet, solid truth that sits comfortably in your chest. Ahead, a small, pale shape catches your eye, something that is not stone or water or sky. You walk closer and find that a spider has built a web across one of the ventilation slits, a delicate, funnel-shaped structure of pale silken threads that trembles gently in the faint breeze. The web is a marvel of small, precise engineering, its threads radiating outward from a central tubular retreat where the spider sits, a tiny dark bead of patient stillness. The silk catches the sunlight and glows with a soft, pearly iridescence, and the whole structure quivers with a constant, microscopic vibration as the air moves through it. You stop and look at the web for a long moment, admiring the skill of its construction, the way each thread is exactly placed, the way the funnel curves inward into a deep, dark hollow where the spider waits. The spider does not move, and you do not disturb it. You step carefully around the web, ducking your head to avoid brushing against the threads, and you continue along the channel. The web remains behind you, a small silent life clinging to the ancient stone, and you carry its image in your mind, the pale quivering silk, the tiny patient spider, the way the sunlight turned the threads to silver. A little further on, you notice a small ripple on the surface of the water, a shallow circular disturbance that is not caused by the current. You stop and look down, and you see that a small pebble has fallen onto the channel floor, a pale, rounded stone no larger than your thumbnail that has somehow come loose from the masonry or been dropped by a bird. The pebble sits on the plaster, and the water flows over it in a smooth, glassy hump, creating a tiny stationary wave that trembles on the surface. The ripple is so small you would miss it if you were not paying attention, but you are paying attention, and you see it clearly, a faint liquid ring that rises and falls and rises again, as regular as a heartbeat. You kneel and retrieve the pebble, your fingers closing around its smooth, water-worn surface. It is cold and heavy, a piece of the aqueduct itself, perhaps a fragment of the stone that was cut and shaped by some long-forgotten mason. You hold it in your palm for a moment, feeling its weight and its coolness, and then you drop it into your satchel, where it joins the other small collected things that have no purpose but to be noticed. The ripple fades, the water resuming its smooth, unbroken flow, and you stand and continue walking. The arcade stretches on, and the plain continues to unfold beneath you. The light is beginning to change, the sun climbing higher, and the shadows shortening, and the heat is now a steady, enveloping presence, a soft, heavy blanket that wraps around you and slows your movements. You adjust the strap of your satchel, feeling the damp cloth of your tunic clinging to your shoulder, and you take a sip of water from the small clay flask that hangs at your belt. The water is warm and tastes faintly of clay, but it is wet and good, and you swallow it slowly, feeling it cool your throat. You walk, and the arches continue, each one a perfect silent repetition of the one before. The rhythm of your footsteps has become so automatic that you are barely aware of it. Your body moves forward without conscious thought, your legs carrying you along the channel, while your mind drifts on the quiet, steady current of the morning. The water flows beside you. Its sound a constant, low hum that you feel as much as hear, a vibration in the stone and in the air that is as regular as a heartbeat. After a very long time, a slight change appears in the view ahead. The straight line of the arcade begins to curve very gently to the left, and the arches shift their angle against the horizon. The curve is so wide and slow that it takes many hundreds of paces to become noticeable, but once you see it, you watch it develop with a quiet, detached interest. The plain below changes too, the olive groves giving way to a wide, open pasture where a herd of small, brown cattle is grazing. The cattle are distant, their shapes tiny and dark against the golden grass, and they move with a slow, ponderous grace, their tails flicking lazily in the heat. You stop at a window and watch the cattle for a while, your elbows resting on the warm stone sill. The animals are peaceful, their heads down, their jaws moving in a slow, steady rhythm as they crop the dry grass. A calf, small and spindly, runs a few steps and then stops, its tail held high, and then it returns to its mother's side. The scene is so calm, so ordinary, that it feels like a small, quiet gift, a moment of simple, pastoral beauty that asks for nothing but to be seen. You watch until the curve of the aqueduct carries the herd out of sight, and then you push yourself upright and continue walking. The curve of the arcade brings a subtle change in the light, the windows now facing slightly more to the south and admitting a warmer, more golden illumination. The plaster on the opposite wall glows with a rich, honeyed tone, and the water catches the light in long, shimmering bands that ripple with your movement. The spider web is far behind you now, and the pebble is in your satchel, and the cattle are grazing in their distant sunlit field, and you are alone with the water, and the stone, and the slow, steady rhythm of the arches. You feel no fatigue. Your legs are tired in a distant, comfortable way, a gentle ache that is more a sense of use than of exhaustion, and your mind is calm and clear, emptied of all but the simple, present moment. The arcade has a quality of endlessness. a sense that it could continue forever, that you could walk this long, straight channel for the rest of your life and never reach the end. The thought is not troubling, it is peaceful, a quiet acceptance of the long, slow passage of time and the steady, patient work that fills it. You walk, and the arches continue, and the plain rolls away beneath you in its vast golden silence. The sun climbs to its zenith, the shadows shrinking to small dark pools at the base of the piers, and the heat rises in a soft, shimmering haze. The water flows beside you, cool and constant, and your footsteps fall in their steady, rhythmic beat, a quiet human counterpoint to the endless stone pulse of the arcade. You are a small, moving figure in a great, enduring structure, a temporary, attentive presence in the long, calm morning, and you walk on, without hurry and without end, into the hazy, golden distance. The long arcade releases you at last, the arches ending where the plain lifts into a low, stony ridge that the aqueduct enters through a shallow cutting. The transition is gentle, the open sky giving way to the cool, dim enclosure of the earth, and you step from the warm, bright morning into a section of the Spacus that is quieter and closer than any you have walked today. The walls here are not plastered in the usual opus signinum. Instead, they are lined with blocks of dressed tufa, their surfaces rough and cool, their joints filled with a hard grey mortar that has darkened with age and moisture. The ceiling is a flat, heavy lintel of stone that seems to press downward, and you must stoop lower than usual, your back curving into a deeper arch. The water, which has been your constant companion all morning, flows beside you with its familiar, glassy murmur. But the sound here is different, more contained, a hushed, intimate whisper that does not echo. You walk slowly into the cutting, your lamp now relit and held low, its warm golden circle moving across the rough stone walls. The ventilation slits are few and far between, mere narrow cracks in the masonry that admit thin, pale blades of light, and the air is cool and damp, carrying the smell of wet earth and ancient stone. The cutting is an old section of the aqueduct, one of the earliest built, and the stonework has a different character from the brick and plaster of the later arcades. The blocks are larger, more irregular, their faces pitted and worn by the slow, patient work of water and time, and they bear the marks of the masons who shaped them, the faint, parallel grooves of the chisel, the small triangular notches of the wedge, the occasional accidental chip where a hammer blow went slightly astray. You pause and run your hand over one of the blocks, feeling its cool, gritty surface, the roughness of the stone under your palm. The block is a piece of the earth itself, a fragment of the hills through which the aqueduct runs, and it has been here for more than a century, bearing the weight of the ceiling and the gentle, constant pressure of the water. You feel a quiet, wordless respect for the stone and for the hands that placed it, and then you lower your hand and continue walking, your lamp held before you like a small, patient sun. After a short distance, the channel dips slightly, the floor sloping downward in a gentle, deliberate gradient that you feel in the way your weight shifts forward onto the balls of your feet. The water quickens its pace, its murmur rising to a soft, eager rustle, and the ceiling lowers further, forcing you to bend almost double. The space becomes a narrow, cramped tunnel, the walls so close that your shoulders brush them on both sides, and the water deepens around your calves, the coldness seeping through the wet cloth of your tunic. You move forward carefully, your lamp held out ahead, and you watch the walls and ceiling with a slow, patient attention, looking for any sign of movement or weakness. It is here, in the deepest and narrowest part of the cutting, that you see it. The lamp casts its warm, wavering light across the left-hand wall, and as the light moves, a thin, dark line catches your eye. The line is a crack, a fissure in the stonework that runs from the ceiling downward, cutting across the rough face of a tufa block and continuing into the mortar joint below. The crack is very fine, no wider than a straw, and it does not glisten with moisture or show any sign of active seepage. It is a hairline, a whisper of a fracture, and you might have missed it if the lamp had not caught its edge and thrown it into sharp, dark relief. You stop and kneel in the water, the cold liquid rising to your waist, and you hold the lamp close to the wall. The crack reveals itself more clearly in the direct light, a thin, dark, wandering line that begins at a small, irregular chip in the ceiling block, descends vertically for the length of a hand, and then angles slightly to the left, following the edge of a mortar joint before fading into the rough surface of the stone. The edges of the crack are sharp and clean, not crumbled or worn, and the stone on either side is solid and firm. The crack is old, you can tell, not fresh. The darkness inside it is the darkness of dust and time, not the wet, glistening darkness of a new break. You set the lamp down on a small dry ledge of stone, and you reach up to touch the crack with your fingertips. The stone is cool and rough, and the crack feels like a very fine shallow groove under your touch, a slight, linear depression that your fingertip can trace but barely feel. You run your thumb along its length, from the ceiling down to the point where it fades, and you feel no movement, no give, no vibration. The stone is stable, the crack a settlement fissure, a quiet ancient scar left by the slow, patient settling of the earth and the weight of the aqueduct over many decades. It does not leak, it does not widen under pressure, and it does not threaten the integrity of the channel. It is a record, a small geological note in the long stone diary of the aqueduct. Ye fetch your lamp and hold it closer still, examining the crack's path with a slow, methodical care. At its widest point, near the ceiling, the crack is perhaps the thickness of a copper coin, and it narrows steadily as it descends, tapering to a fine, invisible point just above the waterline. The mortar joint that it follows is a pale grey line in the rough stone, and the crack runs along it like a dark, wandering thread, never crossing into the block on the other side. The joint is still sound, the mortar hard and dry, and the crack is simply a separation between the mortar and the stone, a tiny, patient gap that has opened over the years and then stopped, content with its small, dark space. You pull out your wax tablet and your bronze stylus, and you begin to make a careful, detailed drawing of the crack. Your stylus moves slowly across the soft wax, tracing the line of the fissure from the ceiling downward, marking its angles and its length, its width and its position relative to the nearest ventilation slit. You add small, neat notations: crack length 12 fingers, width 1 copper at widest, stable, no seepage, located at sector 48, 20 paces from the third slit. The drawing is simple, just a few lines in the wax, but it is precise and accurate, a record that will be added to the Water Office's long, quiet archive, and will guide the repair crew when they come with their fresh hydraulic mortar. You put the tablet away and return your attention to the crack. There is a small copper stylus in your satchel, a thin pointed tool that you use for probing and marking, and you take it out and insert its tip gently into the widest part of the fissure. The tip slides in a short distance and then stops, meeting solid stone, and you withdraw it and examine the point. There is no moisture on the metal, no trace of dampness or clay, just a faint, pale dust that is the powdered stone of the ages. The crack is dry, completely dry, and that is the most important thing. A dry crack is a stable crack, a crack that has found its equilibrium and will not move again until the earth itself moves. You stand, your knees aching slightly from the cold water and the hard stone, and you look at the crack one more time. It is a small thing, a tiny dark line in a vast, enduring structure, and it could easily be ignored or overlooked. But you do not ignore it, because your work is to notice the small things, the tiny, quiet signs that the aqueduct offers, and to record them with patience and care. The crack is not a danger, it is a message, a quiet geological whisper that tells you the earth is still settling, the stone is still adjusting, the aqueduct is still alive in its slow, patient way. You make a cross mark on the wall with your stylus, a small scratched X just below the crack to guide the repair crew to the exact location. The mark is faint, barely visible, but it will be enough, and you note its presence on your tablet crossmark at crack site. Then you pick up your lamp and continue along the channel, leaving the crack behind you in the dim, cool darkness of the cutting. The tunnel continues its low, cramped passage, and you walk slowly, your back bent, your lamp held before you. The water flows beside you with its constant hushing murmur, and the walls remain close and rough, the tufa blocks cool and damp under your occasional touch. You examine the walls as you walk, looking for any other cracks, any other signs of settlement or movement, but the stone is solid, the mortar firm, the channel stable. The crack was an isolated feature, a single quiet note in the long stone song of the aqueduct, and it has been noted and recorded, and will be repaired in due course. After a time the ceiling begins to lift, the walls widening and smoothing into the familiar plastered surface of the opus cystninum, and the ventilation slits return, their pale grey light falling across the water in soft, regular rectangles. You straighten your back with a quiet, grateful sigh, feeling the vertebrae click softly into place, and you extinguish your lamp, the daylight now sufficient to guide you. The cutting is behind you, and the aqueduct continues its long, patient journey toward the city, carrying the water and the morning and your small, careful notes in its quiet, enduring body. You think about the crack as you walk, the thin, dark line in the ancient stone, the way it tapered and faded, the way it accepted your stylus and gave back only dust. It is a small, satisfying thing to have found it and recorded it, to have added its small, quiet story to the long history of the aqueduct. The repair crew will come, perhaps next week, perhaps next month, and they will fill the crack with fresh mortar, sealing it against the slow, patient pressure of the water and the earth. The crack will disappear, becoming just another faint pale scar on the stone, and the aqueduct will continue its work, as it has always done, as it will always do. The morning is growing late now, the sun climbing toward its zenith, and the light inside the channel is a warm, golden haze. The water flows beside you, cool and constant, and your footsteps fall in their steady, rhythmic beat. The crack is behind you, recorded and noted, and the day stretches ahead, calm and quiet, and full of the slow, patient work that you love. You walk on, your tablet full of small, careful marks, your mind calm and clear, and the aqueduct carries you gently, quietly, toward the end of the long, peaceful morning. The final section of the Spacus carries you onward through the warming morning, the channel straightening and the ceiling lifting slightly, and ahead you begin to sense the approach of the city. The sense is not visual at first but auditory, a distant, low murmur that is not the water, a soft, composite sound of many small noises blending together into a quiet, continuous hum. It is the sound of a city waking, of cartwheels on stone streets, of voices calling across courtyards, of dogs barking and doors opening, and the thousand small, unremarkable activities of human life beginning another day. The sound grows slowly as you walk, the quiet of the countryside giving way to the gentle, muffled bustle of the urban edge, and you feel a slight, subtle shift in the air, a faint scent of wood smoke and fresh bread, and the warm, dusty smell of some baked brick. The channel curves gently to the left, and through the ventilation slits you begin to see glimpses of the city's outskirts, tiled rooftops clustered together. Their terracotta surfaces are warm, faded orange, small walled gardens with dark green fig trees, a narrow winding street where a single figure walks slowly, carrying a basket. The arches of the aqueduct now stride over the suburbs, passing above the houses and the streets, and the people below do not look up. They are accustomed to the great stone structure that has stood over their lives for generations. A woman hangs laundry on a rooftop line, the white cloth flapping gently in the breeze, and a child runs along a narrow alley, its laughter a brief, bright sound that rises and fades. You walk on, and the Spacus begins to widen, the walls falling back and the ceiling rising into a high, vaulted space that is the largest chamber you have entered all day. The water around your ankles slows, spreading into a broad rectangular basin, and the sound of the current softens to a deep, liquid stillness. Ahead, you see the iron gate that marks the end of the Spacus, a heavy dark grid of vertical bars set into a thick stone archway, and beyond it a larger, brighter space filled with the sound of falling water and the cool, damp breath of a great, enclosed volume. You have reached the Castellum Divisorium, the distribution tower at the edge of the city, the end of the long stone journey of the aqueduct, and the beginning of the water's quiet, hidden life in the city's pipes and fountains. You pause before the iron gate and take a final measurement of the main channel. The rod is steady in your hand, and you lower it slowly, the water closing around the notches with a silent, glassy ripple. The depth is 3 palms exactly, the flow steady and true, and you make one last mark on your tablet, a small, neat numeral that completes the long column of figures you have gathered since the first light of dawn. Then you lift the rod, shake the water from its tip, and slide it into the leather loop at your belt. The inspection of the Spacus is complete. The iron gate opens with a gentle push, its hinges moving smoothly in their stone sockets, and you step through into the castellum. The chamber is a large rectangular space with a high vaulted ceiling that curves overhead in a series of shallow stone arches. The walls are lined with the same dark, polished opus signinum, but here the plaster has a richer, deeper color, a warm red-brown that glows softly in the light that pours through a row of arched windows set high in the walls. The windows are open to the sky, and through them you can see the pale, washed blue of the late morning and the distant, hazy shape of the hills you left behind at sunrise. The air in the castellum is cool and fresh. moving with a gentle, persistent draft that carries the clean mineral scent of the water and the faint, sweet perfume of the city's gardens. The center of the chamber is dominated by a large rectangular distribution basin, a deep stone tank into which the main channel empties through a wide, arched opening. The water pours into the basin with a deep, throaty chuckle, a sound that is louder and more resonant than any you have heard all morning, and it spreads across the surface in a series of slow, concentric ripples that fade into the dark, still corners. The basin is divided into 3 sections by low, stone walls, and at the far end of each section, a heavy, bronze sluice gate controls the flow into a large lead pipe that descends through the floor. The 3 pipes are the main arteries of the city's water supply, each one feeding a different quarter: the high ground to the north, the central forums and baths, and the low populous districts to the south and west. You walk slowly around the basin, your sandals making a soft, wet sound on the smooth stone floor. The bronze sluices are massive, their frames set deep into the masonry, their gates raised by large threaded rods that are turned by heavy iron wheels. The wheels are dark with age and use, their surfaces worn smooth and polished by the hands of many generations of attendants, and they stand motionless now, the gates fixed at their authorized openings. You stop at the first sluice and examine it carefully, running your hand over the cool dark bronze and feeling the steady, powerful vibration of the water rushing through the opening. The vibration is strong enough to feel in your teeth, a deep, constant hum that speaks of immense, controlled pressure, and you note that the gate is secure, the seals tight, the flow steady and true. You check the position of each gate against the official records, which are carved into a large stone tablet set into the wall above the basin. The tablet is old and worn, its surface polished by the damp air, but the numerals are still deep and legible, and they tell you the exact, authorized flow for each quarter of the city. You measure the gap of each gate with your fingers, pressing them into the narrow, dark spaces between the bronze plates, and you find each one exactly as recorded. The water office's quiet, precise arithmetic still holding firm. You make a small note on your tablet. All gates correct, flows balanced, no tampering detected. Beside the main basin, a narrow stone staircase spirals upward into the upper levels of the castellum, where the attendants keep their small, sparse office and the archive of the aqueduct's records. You do not climb it now. Your work in the water is done, and your report will be delivered later, after you have dried your feet and eaten a small, simple meal. Instead, you walk to one of the arched windows and look out at the city. The view is a patchwork of tiled roofs and narrow streets, of small green courtyards and the pale, dusty expanse of the forum, of the distant, white gleam of the great baths and the dark, cypress-crowned hill of the old citadel. Smoke rises from 100 chimneys, thin grey columns that lean gently in the breeze, and the sound of the city is a soft, constant murmur, a quiet human music that fills the warm air. You stand at the window for a long moment, your hands resting on the cool stone sill, and you feel a quiet, deep satisfaction settle over you. The morning has been long and calm and full of small, careful work, and the aqueduct behind you stretches all the way back to the cool green springs in the distant hills, a long stone thread that you have walked from end to end. The water that pours into the basin beside you has travelled that entire distance, flowing silently through the dark spacus and the bright arcades, past the settling cisterns and the distribution nodes, and now it will spread out through the city's pipes and rise in the fountains and fill the baths and the basins and the drinking cups of 100,000 people. Your work, your slow, patient attention, is a small, unseen part of that great, quiet delivery, and you are content. You pull out your wax tablet one final time and begin to transcribe the morning's notes into a brief, tidy summary for the water office. The summary is short and factual, a dry, precise account of depths and flows, of cracks and scale and seals, of the small, quiet details that make up the life of the aqueduct. The stylus moves slowly across the wax, the letters small and neat, and the summary grows line by line, channel clear, depth steady, scale within limits, cisterns clean, branches intact, crack noted at sector 48, all gates correct. The words are simple, almost boring, but they are the true language of the aqueduct, the quiet, factual record that keeps the water flowing and the city alive. When the summary is complete, you close the tablet and slide it into your satchel, and you walk to the external staircase that leads down from the castellum to the street below. The staircase is a wide stone flight that curves around the outside of the tower, its steps worn smooth by the passage of inspectors and attendants and the occasional curious visitor. You descend slowly, the sun warm on your face and the breeze cool on your damp tunic, and at the bottom you step out onto a small, quiet square. The square is paved with large flat stones, and in its center stands a public fountain, a simple stone basin with a bronze spout that pours a continuous silver stream of water into the clear, shallow pool. The water is the same water you have walked beside all morning, and you stop to watch it fall, the stream breaking into 1,000 bright droplets that catch the sun and scatter it into tiny dancing rainbows. You sit down on a stone bench beside the fountain, your measuring rod resting across your knees, and you listen to the soft, splashing music of the water. The sound is different from the low, steady rush of the Spacus. It is lighter, more musical, a cheerful, liquid voice that speaks of arrival and rest. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the sun on your eyelids and the cool, damp air on your skin, and you let the long, quiet morning settle into your bones. The inspection is over, the report is written, the aqueduct is sound, and the city is drinking. There is nothing more to do, and nothing more that needs to be done, and you sit in the warm, peaceful square, still and calm and quietly, deeply content.